Ruby pressed a cardboard key into my palm. Did we have a house while we were sleeping here? Across the shelter hallway, my grandmother Evelyn stared at our 2 plastic bags. My parents had told me she wanted nothing to do with me. She had just asked why I was not living on Hawthorne Street. What house? I whispered. Evelyn said it should have become mine when I turned 25. I closed my fingers around Ruby's paper key. 3 days later, that tiny key would cross a blue doorway my parents never expected us to find. Before I take you back to the beginning, tell me how you are doing today. Stay with me, and subscribe so you do not miss what came next. 4 months earlier, I still had an apartment, a paycheck, and the comforting belief that one more careful budget could keep my life from falling apart. By September 18th, everything Ruby and I could carry fit into 2 bags. The family shelter occupied a converted brick school on the east side of Riverton, Ohio. The first cold edge of autumn pushed dry leaves against the steps, as Ruby entered with her pink backpack pressed to her chest, looking as if someone might decide we did not belong there. I had packed Ruby's clothes, school supplies, inhaler, and the stuffed rabbit she had slept with since she was 2. My bag held less. Mothers could repeat a sweater, as long as their children still had clean socks. At the front desk, Nora Alvarez gave us plastic identification cards and showed us to the family dormitory. She spoke quietly, without the soft, pitying voice people sometimes used when they wanted you to know they felt fortunate not to be you. You and Ruby have the lower bunk near the window, she said. Dinner is at 6. The showers stay open until 9. Tomorrow we can start your transitional housing paperwork. Thank you, I said. The words scraped my throat. I had spent the last 2 weeks telling Ruby that we were going somewhere temporary while I found a better apartment. I had avoided the word shelter until we stood under the sign outside. Our assigned space had 1 metal bunk bed, a narrow locker, and a curtain that could be pulled halfway around the mattresses. Ruby placed her backpack on the lower bunk and immediately began straightening the gray blanket. She folded one side, then the other, pressing each crease flat with both palms. You do not have to make it perfect, I told her. I know. She tucked the final edge beneath the mattress. I just do not want them to think we are messy. No 6-year-old should have understood that acceptance could feel conditional. I crouched beside her. Nobody is going to send us away because your blanket has a wrinkle. She nodded, but then placed her sneakers side by side beneath the bed, toes facing outward, ready to be slipped on quickly. I turned toward the locker before she could see my face. In June, the property management company where I processed lease files eliminated 9 positions, including mine. Temporary office work followed, but the hours changed constantly, and the pay was lower. Our apartment cost $1,780 before utilities. My $7,200 in savings looked sufficient until it was not. Then the transmission failed in my 12-year-old Honda. The repair cost $4,600. Without the car, I could not get Ruby to school or reach jobs across Riverton suburbs. I paid it, kept paying rent, and cut everything else. By September, less than 1 month of rent remained. I applied everywhere and sold what I could. It was not enough when my landlord declined to renew the lease and required the final balance before move-out. There was no ex-husband to call. I had never married, and Ruby's biological father disappeared before her birth, without establishing paternity or contacting us. I was her sole legal parent. There was no custody dispute, but there was also no second household waiting when mine disappeared. The only people left to call were my parents. I had delayed that call until 3 days before we had to leave the apartment. I stood in the kitchen while Ruby colored at the table and listened to my mother's phone ring. Elaine Bennett answered on the 4th ring. I was wondering how long your pride would last, she said. I closed my eyes. Mom, I need a place for Ruby and me for a few weeks. I am working. I have interviews. I just need time to get another deposit together. She did not ask whether Ruby was safe. She did not ask whether we had food. "I told you this would happen," she said. "You keep making decisions without your family, then expect us to clean up the consequences. I am not asking you to clean up my life. You are asking to move into my home. I am asking for a room." There was a pause. I heard papers sliding across a desk. "We can discuss a room after you acknowledge how much damage you have done," she said. "You will apologize to your father and Mallory. You will let me participate in Ruby's school decisions, and you will sign a temporary family authorization so we can act if you become unstable again." My hand tightened around the phone. "What authorization?" "Nothing dramatic. Medical decisions, school communication, emergency care, the things responsible grandparents should be able to handle. I am Ruby's mother. You do not need authority over her. If you were handling things, you would not be calling me 3 days before losing your apartment." I looked through the doorway. Ruby had stopped coloring. Her crayon hovered above the paper while she listened to the tone of my voice. "I will not sign away decisions about my daughter for a room," I said. "Then perhaps a shelter will teach you to stop expecting your family to rescue you." She ended the call. When Ruby asked what Grandma Elaine had said, I forced myself to put the phone down gently. "She cannot help us right now." Ruby looked at the picture she had been coloring. It showed a yellow house with 4 square windows and smoke curling from the chimney. Did I do something? I crossed the kitchen so quickly that the chair legs scraped the floor. "No, never. This has nothing to do with you." She believed me enough to nod, but not enough to stop drawing houses. At the shelter, Nora found me standing beside the locker with my fingers pressed against my eyes. "The first night is the hardest," she said. "I am fine. That is not a requirement here." I lowered my hands. She explained that families stayed in the dormitory while staff verified employment, school arrangements, income, and available units. Ruby and I could qualify for a small transitional apartment while I rebuilt my savings. "I do not want special treatment," I said. "You are not receiving special treatment. You are using a program designed for the situation you are in." I should have prevented this. "Maybe some things could have gone differently," Nora said. "That does not mean you and your daughter have to be punished while you recover." Her words stayed with me through dinner. Ruby ate half her soup and saved a cracker packet for school, despite my promise that breakfast would be waiting. Afterward, she found a flattened cereal box in the craft bin and borrowed scissors. She worked at a table near the dormitory door, tongue pressed against the corner of her mouth. When she finished, she held up a crooked cardboard key nearly as long as her hand. "What does that open?" I asked. "My room. You do not have a lock on the bunk." "Not this room." She colored the round end blue. "My future room." I sat beside her. She added 3 tiny windows along the cardboard teeth. "You said we are getting another home." "We are. Will I have my own room?" I wanted to promise her a pink wall, a bookshelf, and a door she could close whenever the world became too loud. Instead, I said the only thing I knew I could keep. "You will have a safe place." Ruby put the key in my hand. "You hold it until then." That night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake beneath the shelter blanket listening to the building settle. A toddler cried 2 rows away. Water moved through old pipes. Someone whispered into a phone behind a curtain. I had processed hundreds of rental files and knew how quickly a late payment became the fact every future landlord saw first. I had believed knowledge would protect me, yet I lay there, counting Ruby's breaths beneath a blanket that did not belong to us. 17 days later, on October 5th, staff members began setting up folding chairs in the common room. By then, Ruby knew the breakfast line. I had completed the transitional housing interviews, and we were waiting for an apartment inspection. Nora told us the shelter's board and several longtime donors were visiting the program. "You do not have to attend," she said, "but they will tour the hallway before the meeting. I will keep Ruby out of the way." Nora's expression changed. "You do not have to hide." I know, but I did. I had grown up in Riverton. My parents attended charity events and foundation luncheons. The thought of anyone from their world seeing my shelter badge made my stomach tighten. I picked Ruby up from school and took her toward the quieter study area at the back of the building. Halfway down the corridor, the strap on her backpack tore loose. Her books spilled across the floor. Ruby dropped to her knees. "I am sorry. It is just a strap. I should not have put the crackers in it. One packet of crackers did not break your backpack." I gathered her reading folder and crayons. The donor group had entered the building near the front, their voices moving closer through the hall. I considered carrying everything to the dormitory, but Ruby needed the bag for school the next morning. "Sit here," I said. "I can fix it." I found a small sewing kit in my purse and sat on a bench beneath a bulletin board. Ruby leaned against my shoulder while I pushed the needle through the thick pink fabric. The voices turned the corner. I kept my head down. A pair of dark shoes stopped several feet away. The group behind them fell quiet. I looked up and saw a woman in a tailored gray coat. Her silver hair was cut at her chin. One hand gripped the handle of a black cane, though I remembered her walking without one. The other hand had risen to her mouth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I knew her face from photographs I had hidden in a box for years. Evelyn Whitmore, my grandmother, the woman who had taught me how to read floor plans and let me choose the blue paint for her garden shed. The woman my mother said had called me reckless, ungrateful, and finished. "Claire?" Her voice was barely more than breath. Every explanation my parents had given me rushed back at once. Evelyn had not approved of my pregnancy. Evelyn did not want to be embarrassed by me. Evelyn had asked the family not to mention my name. I stood, placing myself slightly in front of Ruby. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the plastic residence card clipped to my sweater, then to the torn backpack in my hands. She looked past me toward the dormitory entrance, where our 2 bags were visible beside the lower bunk. Ruby stepped around my hip. "Mom, who is she?" Evelyn stared at my daughter. Her fingers tightened around the cane. "This is Evelyn," I said. I could not make myself use the word grandmother. Evelyn swallowed. "How old are you, sweetheart?" Ruby looked at me before answering. 6. A man from the shelter board moved closer and asked Evelyn whether she needed to sit down. She shook her head without looking at him. Then she turned back to me. "Why aren't you living in your house on Hawthorne Street?" The needle slipped from my fingers and landed on the floor. "What house?" No one in the hallway moved. Evelyn looked at the 2 bags again, then at the paper key sticking out of Ruby's coat pocket. "Hawthorne House," she said. "I bought it for you. The Claire Bennett Residence Trust was supposed to distribute the deed when you turned 25. My mind reached for dates because numbers felt safer than faces. I had turned 25 in 2017. Nearly 9 years had passed. Ruby slowly pulled out her cardboard key. "Did we have a house while we were sleeping here?" I could not answer. She placed the paper key in my palm and folded my fingers over it. "Does this open that house?" Evelyn made a small sound and looked away. I faced her, my hand closed around the cardboard. "Are you testing me? Is this some agreement you made with my mother?" "No." "Then why have I never heard of Hawthorne Street?" Evelyn glanced toward the people waiting behind her. "May we speak somewhere private? You can answer one question here." Her shoulders lowered. For the first time, she looked less like the powerful woman from newspaper photographs and more like someone who had reached the end of an explanation she no longer trusted. "The house was placed in trust for you," she said. "Your mother and father were temporary trustees. When you turned 25, the deed should have been distributed to you." "Should have been." Evelyn's eyes met mine. "Your mother told me you chose to keep it in the trust and never wanted to see me again." For several seconds after Evelyn spoke, I heard nothing except the soft scrape of Ruby's cardboard key against my palm. The hallway had not emptied. Shelter staff and donors pretended not to listen. Ruby stood against my side, waiting for one of us to explain how adults could lose an entire house. Nora led us to a private meeting room. Inside, Ruby sat beside me at a round table and turned her paper key over and over. Evelyn lowered herself into the chair across from us. Her cane rested against her knee. Up close, I saw that her hands were trembling. Start with the house, I said. Evelyn told me Hawthorne had been placed in a trust for me, and that my parents managed it until I reached a certain age. They later claimed I chose to continue the arrangement and cut her out of my life. I never chose that. I believe you. You believed them for 9 years. Her eyes dropped. Nora knocked softly before entering with 2 cups of water. She also brought news that should have eased me. My application for the shelter's transitional housing program had cleared its first review. If the inspection and paperwork stayed on schedule, Ruby and I could move into a small apartment within days. You will have a door of your own, Nora told Ruby. Ruby looked at me. A real key? A real one, Nora said. That meant I did not have to accept the hotel Evelyn immediately offered. I can put you somewhere tonight. A suite near Ruby's school. No, Claire, this is not the time for pride. The old command in her voice made my back straighten. Nora already has an apartment process moving. Ruby knows the staff. I am not letting another relative decide where we go before asking what we need. Evelyn opened her mouth, then stopped. Understood, she said. It was the first time that day she gave me an answer without trying to improve it. The next morning, October 6th, Ruby and I met Evelyn at the downtown office where her retired estate counsel kept the official trust formation file. Ruby sat beside me with a coloring book while I reviewed the paperwork. Daniel Reyes entered carrying a slim folder. He was younger than I expected, with reading glasses in one hand and a careful way of speaking that made every sentence sound weighed before it left him. My role needs to be clear before we look at anything, he said. I represent you, Claire, not your grandmother, not the trust, not your parents. Evelyn sat at the far end of the conference table. She is paying the initial retainer, Daniel continued, but she cannot direct my work, receive privileged information, or make decisions for you. This written consent explains that arrangement. You can refuse it and make another payment plan. I read every page. Years of processing leases had taught me to distrust anyone who wanted a signature faster than understanding. Daniel did not hurry me. I signed only after I knew the choice remained mine. Daniel opened the archived file. The first document was a certified deed recorded in 2008. The owner was not Evelyn. It was not Elaine or Martin Bennett. It was not the Bennett Family Foundation. The owner was the Claire Bennett Residence Trust. I read the name twice. That is me. You are the sole beneficiary, Daniel said. Your grandmother created an irrevocable residence trust when you were 16. She transferred Hawthorne into it. Your parents were appointed co-trustees. What does that mean in plain English? The trust owns the house. Your parents were required to manage it for your benefit. The original distribution date was your 25th birthday in 2017. At that point, they were required to distribute the deed to you. Required? Yes. I looked at Evelyn. Then why didn't they? Daniel placed 2 more documents beside the deed. The trust allowed one narrow exception. Before the 2017 distribution date, you could elect to continue it for up to 10 additional years, ending no later than 2027. The election had to be notarized, and you had to receive independent legal advice before signing. The first document was titled Continuation Election. The second was a beneficiary acknowledgement. Both carried my typed name and what was supposed to be my signature. Daniel tapped the dateline. There is already a fatal problem. This document is dated 2020, 3 years after the deed should have been distributed. Even if the signature were genuine, it could not retroactively excuse the trustee's failure in 2017. At most, someone used it to paper over that gap. My skin went cold. The signature could survive a quick glance, but the loop in the capital B curled inward. Mine always opened toward the next letter. I did not sign this. Daniel did not react as if belief alone could settle it. Your statement matters. It is not enough by itself. We need the original documents, the notary record, and a forensic examination. I never met an independent lawyer. I never went to a notary. I did not even know the trust existed. Ruby looked up from her coloring book. What is a notary? A person who is supposed to make sure the right person is signing, I said. She studied the page. But that is not you. No. Daniel turned the continuation election so the notary block faced me. The date was the 17th of April, 2020. For a moment, it meant nothing. Then my body remembered before my mind did. The hospital bracelet, Ruby's first cry, the nurse placing her against my chest. That was the day Ruby was born. Evelyn leaned forward. Are you certain? I looked at her so sharply that she pulled back. I know my daughter's birthday. I did not mean that. Daniel placed his hand flat on the file. Hospital records can establish where Claire was. The notary journal should show where the signing allegedly occurred and what identification was presented. My eyes moved back to the signature. Someone had chosen the day I was exhausted and focused entirely on my newborn. No lawyer had spoken to me. No notary had watched me sign. Daniel showed me a change of address form from the trust file. The beneficiary mailing address had been changed from my old apartment to a post office box in North Riverton. I have never used a post office box. Annual accountings are marked as sent there, he said. All of them? From 2017 forward. I reached for the pages. Each annual entry had a date, postage notation, and initials approving the mailing. Elaine's initials appeared on some, Martin's on others. Reports about a house held for me had been sent to a box I had never seen. Why didn't the income appear on my taxes? Daniel explained that the trust used its own tax identification number and claimed to retain the income. If nothing was distributed, no beneficiary tax form necessarily reached me. So the silence looked normal. From outside it may have, he said. That does not mean the management was proper. Evelyn's estate counsel had sent over a second archive box. Inside were personal letters, cards, and returned envelopes arranged by year. Evelyn touched the top envelope but did not open it. I wrote after your 25th birthday, she said. When you did not answer, Elaine told me you had received the house arrangement and wanted nothing more from me. Then this arrived. She handed me a letter. The paper was cream, the kind my mother used for formal notes. My name appeared at the bottom. The letter said I was tired of money being used to control me. It said Evelyn had tried to purchase my loyalty. It said I had chosen my parents as my family and wanted no further contact. Some of the language resembled things I had said during old arguments. That was what made it convincing. But one sentence did not belong to me. I need to protect my peace from your manipulations. My mother had used that exact phrase after I refused to let her attend one of my prenatal appointments. This is Elaine, Daniel asked. How can you tell? Because she does not just lie about what people did. She writes the feelings they are supposed to have afterward. I read the letter again. It did not say I hated Evelyn. It said I was protecting myself from her. That gave Evelyn a reason to stay away while making her feel that contacting me would be another act of control. It was a cage built to look like my own boundary. Evelyn opened another box. There were birthday cards, letters, a photograph of the garden shed I had helped paint, and envelopes sent to addresses where I had never lived. Then I found a card with a tiny silver cradle printed on the front. Ruby was coloring beside me, humming under her breath. I turned away slightly before opening it. My dear Claire, your mother told me the baby arrived safely. I hope you know there will always be room for both of you at Hawthorne, whether you need it now or years from now. I will not intrude, but I will not stop loving you. Evaine. I read it a second time. Ruby had been hours old when the false continuation election was used to paper over 3 years of unauthorized control. Around the same time, Evelyn had written that the house had room for us. I pressed the card against the table. You knew she was born. Evelyn nodded. Elaine sent one photograph. She told me you did not want me at the hospital. You could have called. I did. Your number had changed. You could have found another one. I went to your parents' house 2 months later. Elaine said you had moved and that you would consider any attempt to find you harassment. You believed her. I had the letter. You had money, lawyers, and every resource in the world. You built neighborhoods, but you could not find me? Evelyn's face tightened, but she did not retreat into anger. I told myself I was respecting your wishes. No. You were protecting yourself from being rejected again. The room went still. Ruby stopped humming. I lowered my voice, but I did not take the words back. You chose the version that let you stop looking. That was convenient. It was not respect. Evelyn looked at the card in my hand. You are right. Her agreement left nowhere for my anger to strike. I was proud and hurt, and I let those things become an excuse. My silence helped them. She did not reach for her checkbook. She did not offer another hotel. She sat with what I had said. Daniel gave us several minutes before returning to the documents. We need to move carefully, he said. The trust file establishes the structure and the apparent election. It does not yet establish every transaction or who created which document. I wiped my eyes before Ruby could study them too closely. What do you need? He began listing records. I recognized the categories before he finished. Deed history, tax returns, bank statements, rental ledgers, trustee accountings, original documents, notary records, and management agreements. Add insurance declarations, I said, and vendor invoices. If the property was rented, someone paid repairs, premiums, and utilities between tenants. The names and addresses will show who was actually managing it. Daniel looked at me for a moment, then wrote them down. Anything else? County tax mailing history. If they changed the beneficiary address, I want to know whether they changed every other address at the same time. Evelyn watched me, but this time she did not interrupt. Daniel said a temporary restraining order might be necessary if anyone was preparing to transfer the property or place a new lien against it. Before filing, he wanted evidence of an immediate threat. We should not alert your parents until we preserve what we can, he said. My phone vibrated. The sender was my mother. For one irrational second, I thought she knew where I was. Instead, the message contained a digital invitation bordered in gold. Home begins here. The Bennett Family Foundation invited guests to celebrate a family legacy and a new housing initiative on October 8th. The address was 18 Hawthorne Street. Mallory stood on the front steps in a pale dress, one hand resting on a blue door. I had seen that door before. It had appeared in cropped Christmas photographs. In one, Mallory stood beside a maple tree, with the house number hidden behind a wreath. They had shown me pieces of Hawthorne for years. They had simply never shown me enough to name it. Daniel turned his laptop toward us, after searching the archived electronic folder. There is more. A draft trustee deed had been prepared for transfer to an entity called Mallory Homes LLC. It had not been signed or recorded. The file notes indicated Martin intended to execute it after the event and submit it to the county recorder on the next business day. Can he do that? He can sign a document, Daniel said. Whether it legally transfers good title is another question. But once it is recorded, unwinding the situation becomes more complicated. We need to confirm the threat and prepare emergency relief. Evelyn looked ready to stand. I will call Elaine. No, I said. She cannot be allowed to proceed. She also cannot know how much we have found until the records are protected. Daniel nodded. That is the safer course. I studied Mallory's photograph. My sister was smiling in front of a door attached to my name, while Ruby's paper key rested beside a shelter coloring book. I did not want a public confrontation before the records were protected or my parents could coach Mallory. First, I needed to see the house. I needed to know who lived there and what had been changed. Then my gaze returned to the continuation election. April 17, 2020. My daughter's birthday. The day I had been exhausted, frightened, and happier than I had ever known how to be. While I held Ruby for the first time, someone had written my name beneath a decision I had never made. They signed my future away while I was giving birth. I closed the file. Tomorrow, I want to see the house they kept in my name, without ever letting me through the door. The next morning, I buttoned Ruby's coat while she stood between my knees and watched my face. "You are going to the house," she said. It was not a question. "I am going to look at it. Can I come?" I wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted Ruby beside me when I saw Hawthorne for the first time, as if her presence could make the place ours before anyone argued otherwise. But the house was still a file full of forged signatures, a draft deed, and adults who had already lied about it for years. "You have school. I could miss one day." "You could, but you are not going to." I pulled her zipper to her chin. "I do not know what I am going to find, and I will not promise you a home before I know it is safe." Ruby looked disappointed, but she nodded. Nora met us near the entrance and said the transitional apartment had passed inspection. Our lease meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. A real door, a real key, a place that did not depend on my parents changing their minds. I walked Ruby to school. Before she went inside, she took the cardboard key from her pocket and held it out. "For luck." I closed her fingers around it. "You keep it today." She slipped it back into her coat. "Then you have to come back and tell me the truth." "I will." Daniel picked me up outside the school. Evelyn sat in the rear seat with her cane beside her. She had brought no assistant and offered no instructions. The drive took 20 minutes. I had passed within 6 blocks of Hawthorne dozens of times while working for the property management company. My life had moved close enough to touch it. Daniel parked across the street from number 18. The house stood behind a low stone wall. It was not a mansion, but a solid 3-story brick home, with a deep porch and a maple tree scattering gold leaves across the lawn. The front door was blue. I had seen that exact color in family photographs. In Christmas pictures, wreaths covered the number and camera angles cut off the porch. I had assumed the place belonged to a donor. They had shown me Hawthorne in pieces while making sure I never knew what I was seeing. Evelyn came to stand beside me. "I chose the blue," she said quietly. "You were 16. You said every serious house needed one brave thing." I remembered saying that about her garden shed. I did not remember being told she had used my choice here. Daniel photographed the house from the public sidewalk and checked the property number against the deed. He reminded us that the trust owned the property, but we did not yet have the right to enter or interfere with whoever was in possession. Evelyn looked at the lock. "I still have the original key." "Do not use it," Daniel said. "If the trust owns the house, I created the trust. And you are not the current trustee. Entering without permission would create a problem we do not need." Her jaw tightened. I said, "He is right." She turned to me. "We do this properly," I continued. "My parents have spent years creating papers that make me look informed and cooperative. I will not give them one real incident they can use to call me unstable." Evelyn took her hand away from her coat pocket. A screen door opened at the house next door. An older woman stepped onto the porch, carrying a small watering can. She stared at Evelyn for several seconds before setting it down. "Evelyn Whitmore?" Evelyn looked toward her. "Margaret?" Margaret Hale crossed her lawn in gardening gloves. She had lived beside Hawthorne for 32 years. "I thought you had sold it," she told Evelyn. "I did not." Margaret looked at me. "Are you Claire?" "Yes." "I wondered if you would ever come." Daniel asked how she knew my name. Margaret removed one glove, finger by finger. "The first tenant said the home belonged to a trust for a girl named Claire. That was years ago. Then management changed and nobody mentioned a trust anymore." "What management company?" I asked. "Hawthorne Residential Services." Their name was on the rent envelopes and repair vans. Daniel wrote it down, though we had already seen the company in the records. Margaret said 3 families had rented the house before contractors began a major renovation. Mallory moved in after Christmas. "Did my parents come often?" "Your father handled the workers. Your mother chose the furniture. They host foundation people here." She glanced at banner poles beside the fence. Looks like another event tomorrow. I followed her gaze. Rolled white fabric rested near the garden gate. Gold letters showed through one fold. Home begins here. My stomach turned. Did anyone ever ask about me? I said. Margaret hesitated. Once, a county notice came with your name on it. I saw it sticking out of the mailbox because the carrier put it in the wrong slot. Mallory collected it that evening. When? Spring, maybe March. 6 months earlier. Before I could ask more, a black SUV turned onto the street and stopped in Hawthorne's driveway. Mallory stepped out wearing cream trousers and heeled boots. She carried a cardboard tray of coffee cups in one hand. When she saw us, the tray tilted and coffee splashed across one lid. She set it on the hood. What are you doing here? Her eyes moved from me to Evelyn, then to Daniel. Evelyn said, looking at a house that never belonged to your parents. Mallory's face tightened. Mom said you were confused. She said that quickly, I said. She said you cornered Grandma at the shelter and filled her head with some story. I did not tell Evelyn there was a house. She told me. Mallory looked across the street as if checking whether anyone else was listening. Margaret had returned to her porch but had not gone inside. This is private, Mallory said. So, was hiding it from me. She folded her arms. You signed the paperwork. Dad has handled this property for years. Have you seen the paperwork? Of course. What is the name of the trust? Her mouth opened, then closed. I took one step toward the driveway, but remained on the sidewalk. What is the name on the deed, Mallory? All of this was reviewed by lawyers. That was not my question. She picked up the coffee tray again. One cup rattled against another. The house belongs to Mom and Dad. Tomorrow they are announcing that I will oversee it through the foundation. Daniel spoke for the first time. A draft trustee deed to Mallory Homes LLC does not establish current ownership. Mallory stared at him. How do you know about that? The question answered more than she intended. You knew there was a transfer, I said. I knew there were papers for tomorrow. I do not handle Dad's legal files. Evelyn said. Your parents cannot give you what was never theirs. Mallory's cheeks flushed. You disappeared for 9 years. Claire disappeared even longer. Mom and Dad kept this family functioning. I did not disappear, I said. I was told Evelyn wanted nothing to do with me. And she was told you wanted nothing to do with her, Daniel added. Mallory looked from one of us to the other. For an instant, the anger left her face. Then she reached for it again. Claire has blamed this family for every bad decision she has ever made. I lost my job. I lost my apartment. Those things are mine to face. Forging my signature is not. No one forged anything. You answered, before asking which signature. Mallory gripped the tray so tightly that the cardboard bent. I asked, Did you know Ruby and I were living at a shelter? No. The word came fast. Did Mom know? I said I did not know. I asked about Mom. Mallory glanced toward the front door. It was only a second. I could not know what she had heard or when she had heard it, but her refusal to meet my eyes told me the subject was not entirely new. She said you were having housing problems, Mallory said. She did not say shelter. Did you ask? You stopped speaking to us. My 6-year-old daughter did not. Mallory looked away. A contractor opened Hawthorne's front door from inside and called her name. He was holding a roll of wallpaper and asked whether she wanted the upstairs room finished before the event. The open doorway gave me a view through the hall to a pale room beyond the staircase. Mallory turned, blocking part of my view, but not before I saw the small white bed frame. Cloud-shaped shelves lined one wall. Unopened boxes marked nursery sat beside a stuffed elephant. My throat closed. Whose room is that? I asked. Mallory looked over her shoulder. It is not finished. Whose room? She lifted her chin. Mine. Someday. You are not pregnant. I know that. So you prepared a bedroom for a child who does not exist. Her expression hardened. People are allowed to plan their lives. I thought of Ruby folding a shelter blanket until no wrinkle remained. I thought of her sneakers lined beneath the bunk in case we had to leave quickly. I thought of the cardboard key she had carried to school. Mallory's possible future child already had a room. My actual daughter had been given conditions. Evelyn moved toward the gate. I want everyone out of this house until the trust records are reviewed. Daniel stepped between her and the latch. You cannot order an immediate eviction on the sidewalk. I can replace the locks. No, you cannot. This is Claire's property. The trust still holds title, her parents remain trustees, and Mallory may have occupancy rights. Changing the locks could be an unlawful eviction. Evelyn struck the pavement once with the rubber tip of her cane. They stole 9 years. And we do not correct that by creating a new violation, I said. She looked at me, anger and shame moving across her face. I wanted to cross the lawn and carry the small bed to the curb. But I had spent too long being called reckless by people who planned their cruelty carefully. We document, I said. We file. We do not give them a story in which we are the ones who broke in. Daniel's phone rang. He walked several yards away to answer it. Mallory watched him, then reached for the coffee tray. You need to leave before I call Dad. Tell him I came, I said. Tell him I saw the blue door. Her face changed at that, though I did not yet know why. She carried the coffee inside and shut the door. The lock clicked. Daniel returned with his phone still in his hand. That was the title examiner, he said. Martin's office sent over a proposed deed package yesterday. The cover instructions say it is to be executed after tomorrow's foundation event and presented for recording on Monday morning. Can you stop it? Evelyn asked. I can file for emergency relief. I need Claire's sworn declaration, the trust documents, proof of the proposed transfer, and enough facts to show immediate harm. How long? If we finish today, I can seek a temporary restraining order tomorrow morning. I cannot promise when a judge will review it. Evelyn looked toward the house. Then tomorrow's event should be canceled. Daniel shook his head. A public event is not the legal transfer. The deed package is the threat. We focus on that. I looked at the gold lettering near the garden gate. Tomorrow, my mother would stand at Hawthorne and speak about housing security. My father would present Mallory as the future of the family foundation. They expected me to stay ashamed and invisible while they placed a ceremonial ribbon around the thing they had hidden. I am going to the event, I said. Daniel studied me. You are not required to confront them. I know. Evelyn asked. What do you expect to accomplish? I want them to know I have seen the house. I want the board members to hear that ownership is disputed before anyone announces Mallory as its steward, and I want my parents to decide whether they will repeat their lie while I am standing in front of them. Daniel warned me not to accuse anyone publicly before the evidence was secured. I agreed. My presence would ask enough. At his office, I signed a declaration that I had never known about the trust, or signed the continuation election, and had been giving birth on the alleged notarization date. Daniel attached the draft deed, trust deed, and event invitation, then sent formal notice requiring my parents to preserve the records. By the time I left, the October light had begun to fade. I walked to Ruby's school because I needed the cold air. Dirt from Hawthorne's curb marked one boot. Ruby noticed it as soon as she came through the school doors. You got dirty. I stood near a garden. The house garden? I took her backpack. Yes. She searched my face. Did you see it? I did. Is it yours? The answer caught behind my teeth. There are papers that say it was meant for me. There are other papers we have to challenge. I am not going to call it our home until I know no one can use it to hurt us. Ruby considered that with the seriousness she usually reserved for spelling words. Was the door blue? I stopped walking. How did you know that? She shrugged. The key wanted a blue door. I smiled, despite everything. Yes, the door was blue. We reached the shelter as dinner was being served. Nora had left a note confirming our transitional apartment lease meeting for the next afternoon. Ruby read the word apartment twice and asked whether she could choose where to put her stuffed rabbit. "You can." She seemed satisfied until we reached our bunk. Then she removed her coat and pulled the cardboard key from the pocket. One blue corner had bent during school. She smoothed it against her knee. "Mom?" "Yes?" She did not look up. Was there a room for me? I saw the pale wallpaper, the cloud shelves, and the small white bed waiting for someone who had not been born. I sat beside my daughter on the lower bunk. For the first time that day, I had no truthful answer I could bear to give her. The next morning, Ruby stood in front of the shelter mirror while I brushed her hair. "You still have not answered me," she said. I paused with the brush halfway through a knot. "About the room?" She nodded. I had spent most of the night trying to find words that were true without placing an adult betrayal on a 6-year-old's shoulders. "There was a room being prepared for a child," I said. "But it was not made for you." Ruby looked at our reflection. "Why not?" "Because the people living there were making plans without telling us the truth." She lowered her eyes. I set the brush down and turned her toward me. "That does not mean you were forgotten by me. It does not mean you deserved less. Do you understand?" "I think so." I was not sure I did. Nora had arranged our transitional apartment lease meeting for 2 that afternoon. The foundation event at Hawthorne began at 4. I considered skipping it and taking Ruby directly to the apartment after signing the papers. A real home, even a temporary one, mattered more than watching my parents lie in public. Then Daniel called. "The emergency filing is complete," he said. "The judge has not ruled yet, but your parents and the county recorder have been formally notified that the proposed transfer is disputed. If Martin signs anything now, he cannot claim he acted without notice." "Does that stop him?" "It should make any competent attorney advise him to stop. It does not physically prevent him from signing." "Then I am still going." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "If you attend, do not touch documents, threaten anyone, or say a crime has been proven. State only what you know. The trust owns Hawthorne. You deny signing the continuation election. The proposed transfer is disputed." "I understand. Your parents may try to provoke you. They have had 34 years of practice." "That is exactly why I am warning you." After the call, Evelyn arrived with 3 garment bags. I said no before she unzipped one. She started to argue, then stopped. "What would you like me to do with them?" "Take them back." Nora offered me a clean charcoal coat and made clear I could decline. I accepted it. Evelyn watched the difference between an offer and a decision made for me, then carried the garment bags away. At 2, Ruby and I completed the transitional apartment paperwork. The unit was small, 1 bedroom with a pull-out sofa, and the lease would be in my name. A final safety inspection still had to be completed, so Nora expected to hand us the keys within several days. Ruby touched the cardboard key in her pocket. "So it is really ours?" "For the program period," Nora said. "Once the inspection passes, you will have a door of your own." Nora offered to keep Ruby with her during the event, if either of us changed our minds. I knelt beside Ruby in the lobby. "You do not have to come with me. I want to see the blue door. There may be people who say unkind things." "Will you leave if I ask?" "Yes." "Then I want to go." I had already arranged that Evelyn's driver would remain outside and that Evelyn would take Ruby straight back to Nora at the shelter the moment voices rose. Ruby would stay beside one of us and away from the cameras. "You do not go anywhere alone," I said. "If you feel scared, we leave immediately." Ruby held up her real apartment key. "We have somewhere else to go now." With that exit plan in place, I agreed to let her come for the brief announcement. Evelyn's driver dropped us 1 block from Hawthorne. I had refused to arrive in the Blacktown car at the center of the event. The garden had been transformed. White tents and patio heaters stretched across the lawn. Gold signs displayed the logo of the Bennett Family Foundation. Waiters carried trays between clusters of donors. A local television crew stood near the porch, filming the blue door behind a podium. Across the top of the stage, a banner read, "Home begins here." Mallory stood beside the podium in a pale green dress, smiling for photographs. The contractors had finished the nursery window. New white curtains hung behind the glass. Ruby saw it too. Her fingers closed around mine. We stayed near the rear gate while Elaine began her speech. My mother wore ivory and stood beneath the banner, as if the entire garden had been built around her. Every child deserves to fall asleep knowing where she will wake up, she said. No mother should have to choose between protecting her dignity and asking for help. Applause moved across the lawn. For a moment, I could not breathe. 3 days earlier, Ruby had folded a shelter blanket because she feared being considered untidy. Elaine had known I was facing eviction before we arrived there. She had offered help only if I allowed her authority over my daughter. Now she was telling strangers that dignity should not be the price of shelter. Evelyn leaned toward me. We can leave. No. You do not need to hear this. I need to know whether she can say it while looking at me. Elaine continued. She described Hawthorne as a symbol of family stewardship. The foundation did not own the house. My parents had simply allowed it to use the property while acting as trustees. She thanked Martin for protecting it through changing markets. Then she introduced Mallory as the next generation of leadership. Martin stepped onto the stage carrying a dark blue folder. Daniel had warned me that a public presentation did not itself transfer ownership. Still, the folder looked too much like the one containing the draft deed. Ruby whispered, "Is that our paper?" "I do not know. Are they giving the house away?" "They are trying to make people believe they can." Elaine turned toward Mallory. "Today, our family begins a new chapter." That was when Evelyn stepped through the gate. A few people recognized her immediately. Conversation stopped in small waves as she crossed the lawn with her cane striking the stone path. I followed with Ruby. Elaine saw Evelyn first. Her smile vanished. Then she saw me. Martin's hand closed around the blue folder. The color drained from his face so quickly that even from the back of the lawn I could see it. Mallory stopped clapping. No one announced us. We did not need an introduction. Elaine stepped away from the microphone. "Mother?" Evelyn did not answer. Elaine's eyes moved to Ruby, then back to me. "What are you doing here?" The microphone carried her question across the garden. Several guests turned. I said, "You invited me." Her gaze flicked toward the digital guest list table. She had sent the invitation as if she expected me to stay away. "This is not the time," she said. "You chose the time when you scheduled a transfer involving a trust created for me." A murmur passed through the nearest group. Martin moved quickly down the stage steps. "Claire, let us speak inside." He kept his voice low, but his hand hovered near my elbow, as if he intended to guide me away. I stepped back before he touched me. "Do not move me out of sight." His expression hardened. "This is a foundation event. Your personal dispute does not belong here. You are standing at Hawthorne with papers prepared for Mallory. That makes it part of the event." Mallory came toward us. "Can we please not do this in front of everyone?" I looked at the television camera. "You had no problem announcing the house in front of everyone." Elaine approached, her smile restored but stretched too tightly. "Claire has been under tremendous stress," she told the people nearest us. "She recently misunderstood some old family documents." I looked directly at her. "Did I misunderstand the Claire Bennett Residence Trust?" Her smile faltered. "Lower your voice. The microphone is behind you, Mom." Evelyn stepped beside me. "Answer her." Elaine turned toward her mother. "You are being manipulated. By the granddaughter you told me never wanted to see me? I told you what Claire asked us to tell you." I felt Ruby's hand tighten. Daniel had instructed me to state only facts I could support. "I never wrote that letter," I said. "I never signed a continuation election. I never authorized you to keep managing Hawthorne after I turned 25. Martin opened the blue folder. "You signed through counsel. Name the lawyer." He glanced at Elaine. "Records from 9 years ago are not something I carry in my head. You carried the deed package today." His face went still. A man wearing a foundation board pin moved closer. I recognized him from the shelter donor group. "Martin, is ownership being challenged?" "This is a family misunderstanding," Martin said. Daniel entered through the gate at that moment. He had arrived separately and carried a copy of the filed emergency petition. "It is a formally disputed trust transaction," he said. "Notice was served this morning." Martin's jaw tightened. "You had no right to disrupt this event." Daniel kept his voice calm. "I did not address your guests. I am advising my client." Elaine turned to Evelyn. "Mother, Claire has filled your head with accusations because she knows you are vulnerable." Evelyn lifted her chin. "I may have been foolish. I am not confused. You have not managed these affairs in years. I remember purchasing this house. I remember the trust I created. What I do not remember is giving you permission to turn it into a reward for whichever daughter obeyed you." Mallory flinched. Elaine noticed. "Do not let her divide us," she said to Mallory. I almost laughed at the choice of words. Ruby tugged my sleeve. "Mom, can I see the room?" I looked down. "What room?" "The one through the window." Before I could answer, the front door opened behind Mallory. A photographer and 2 foundation guests stepped into the hallway, giving Ruby a clear view inside. The nursery door stood open. Cloud shelves lined the wall. The white bed frame had been assembled. A small wooden sign bearing the word "Dream" rested on a dresser. Ruby released my hand and took 2 steps toward the porch. I caught up immediately. "Stay with me." She did, but she stared through the doorway. Mallory moved in front of the entrance. "That room is private." Ruby looked at her. "Is it for your baby?" Mallory's eyes darted toward the guests. "Yes. Someday." Ruby considered the answer. Then she asked, "Why did you make a room for a baby who is not here when Mom and I did not have anywhere to sleep?" No one spoke. The television camera remained pointed toward the stage, but its operator had turned his head. Mallory's lips parted. Elaine recovered first. "Ruby, sweetheart, adult finances are complicated." She asked a simple question, Evelyn said. Elaine ignored her. "Your mother chose not to accept our help." I felt Ruby look at me. That was the danger of Elaine's lies. She wrapped them around a piece of truth. I had rejected her offer. A child could not understand that the price had been authority over her life. "I refused to give you control over Ruby," I said. "I did not refuse a safe home. You never told me this house existed." Elaine's face changed. For the first time, anger broke through the practiced concern. A house like Hawthorne requires stability. It required trustees who followed the trust. Martin stepped between us. "That is enough." He turned to the board member. "We will postpone the ceremonial announcement until council reviews the notice." The board member looked toward Daniel. "Was a deed going to be signed today?" Martin said. "A future stewardship document was prepared. Nothing has been recorded. So the answer is yes." Other board members began gathering near the stage. The event had stopped without anyone officially ending it. Elaine lowered her voice. "You are humiliating your sister." I looked at Mallory, standing in front of the nursery. "My daughter slept in a family shelter while you prepared that room." "I did not know," Mallory said. "Then ask your parents why." Elaine reached for Ruby. "Come inside, sweetheart. You should not be exposed to this." I moved between them. "Do not touch her." The words came out quieter than I expected. That made Elaine stop faster than shouting would have. Ruby pressed against my side. Elaine stared at me as if I had violated something sacred. "I am her grandmother. You are the woman who tried to make housing conditional on authority over her." Several people heard. Elaine stepped back. Daniel touched my arm lightly, waiting until I looked at him. "We have accomplished what was necessary. The board knows the title is disputed. The proposed transfer has been suspended. We should leave before this becomes less controlled." He was right. I looked toward Evelyn. She nodded. We turned toward the gate. Behind us, Martin spoke sharply to someone near the side entrance. I glanced back and saw him handing a brown records box to a man in a dark jacket. The man carried it toward a service van parked behind the garden wall. I stopped. Daniel followed my gaze. "Do you know him?" "No," I took out my phone and photographed the van, the license plate, and the box in the man's arms. Martin noticed. His expression changed. Daniel immediately sent a written preservation notice to Martin's attorney, identifying the box and vehicle. He also called his office to add the incident to the emergency filing. The man did not drive away. After receiving a call, he returned the box to the house. The detail did not prove what was inside, but it removed any chance for Martin to say no one had seen him try to move records after receiving legal notice. We left before Elaine could create another explanation. In the car, Ruby held the cardboard key between both hands. Grandma Elaine said you said no. I said no to papers that would have let her make decisions about you. Did she know we did not have a home? The question struck harder than anything said in the garden. I told her we were losing the apartment. But did she know about the shelter? I do not know yet. Ruby looked out the window. I do not like when grown-ups make the truth have secret parts. Neither did I. At the shelter, Nora was waiting near the dormitory entrance. She checked Ruby's face before asking me anything about the event. The apartment inspection is scheduled for Monday, she said. Until then, your beds here remain yours. Ruby placed her shoes beneath the bunk, still aligned for a quick departure, then tucked the cardboard key under her pillow. After she fell asleep, I sat at the common room table with a paper cup of tea. My phone rang at 10:17. Martin. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I remembered the blue folder and the records box. I answered. What do you want? To stop this. Before your mother makes it worse. You mean before the board learns more? I mean before Ruby is dragged through a public fight that will follow her for years. You brought cameras to the house. For the foundation. Not for a family spectacle. You created the spectacle when you tried to give away property held for me. He exhaled slowly. We need to meet without Evelyn and without Elaine. My lawyer will be present. Claire, involving more lawyers will only consume money that should be used for your daughter. Then you should not have created documents requiring one. His voice lowered. I can get you and Ruby out of the shelter immediately. A safe apartment, school expenses, and enough money to rebuild. No waiting for a judge, no public accusations. I looked toward the bedroom door. What do I have to sign? A pause followed. Meet me tomorrow. I will explain everything. No private meeting. Bring Reyes, if that is what makes you comfortable. What makes me comfortable is knowing why my name was signed on Ruby's birthday. For the first time, Martin's controlled tone slipped. Your mother handled the family communications. That was not my question. He recovered quickly. Tomorrow at 10, the cafe across from Daniel's office. You will see that there is a reasonable way to resolve this. Reasonable for whom? For everyone who still has something to lose. He ended the call. I sat alone in the shelter's common room, listening to the vending machine hum and Ruby breathe beyond the dormitory curtain. My father believed he was offering us safety. But the way he had asked me to come told me safety was not the thing he planned to buy. By 8 the next morning, 3 relatives had called to ask why I had ruined Mallory's announcement. None of them asked why my parents had tried to transfer a house held for me. My Aunt Diane said Elaine had spent the night crying. My cousin Brooke said Mallory could barely leave her bedroom. An uncle I had not spoken to in 4 years told me that family disputes belonged behind closed doors. I almost asked which closed door he meant. The blue one my parents had hidden from me, or the shelter door they had expected me to remain behind. Instead, I said, "Did my mother tell you I was living in a family shelter?" The line went quiet. She said you had temporary housing difficulties. That is not an answer. She said she offered to help. She offered to help if I signed papers giving her authority over my daughter. My uncle cleared his throat. There are always 2 sides. There were not 2 sides to a forged signature. There were only people who had seen enough of my mother's version to feel comfortable avoiding mine. By noon, the Bennett Family Foundation posted a statement online. Yesterday's Home Begins Here event was interrupted by a private family misunderstanding involving historical documents. The foundation remains committed to protecting vulnerable families and will not discuss confidential personal matters. They had turned my life into a misunderstanding and their actions into confidentiality. The photograph beneath the statement showed Elaine at the microphone with the Hawthorne banner behind her. Ruby and I had been cropped out. I took screenshots and sent them to Daniel. He called immediately. "Do not respond publicly." I was not planning to. "Good. Martin's attorney has acknowledged the preservation notice. The records box from yesterday is supposedly archived donor material. Do you believe that?" "I believe the description is convenient." Daniel had filed the emergency petition overnight. That morning, the probate judge entered a temporary restraining order, blocking any trustee deed, new lien, or destruction of trust records. Daniel warned that it did not return Hawthorne to me or decide whether fraud had occurred. It only froze the property while the court reviewed the case. Martin remained a trustee on paper, but he could no longer move the asset in silence. Ruby attended school while I met Martin at the cafe, across from Daniel's office. Daniel arrived first and chose a table in the open section near the counter. He placed a legal pad between us and reminded me that I could leave at any time. Martin came in carrying a black leather folder. He looked as he always had before an important business meeting. Dark suit, polished shoes, silver watch. No visible sign that the previous afternoon had ended with his foundation board questioning him in front of donors. He sat without ordering anything. "I am disappointed you brought him," he said. Daniel replied. "You agreed she could." "I agreed because Claire has decided every conversation now requires an audience. I decided every document now requires someone who is not related to you." Martin looked at me for several seconds. "You embarrassed your mother. You tried to give Mallory a house held in my trust. No transfer occurred because the board stopped the announcement. The board postponed a ceremonial transition. You are treating a draft as a completed act." I leaned back. "Then why was it scheduled to be recorded Monday?" His expression did not change, but his fingers tightened around the folder. "We are not here to argue about terminology." Daniel said, "Terminology matters when it describes an attempted transfer by a trustee." Martin opened the folder. Inside was a proposed settlement agreement, 27 pages long. He pushed it toward me. "I am offering a practical solution." I did not touch it. "What does practical mean?" "A 2-year lease on a safe apartment near Ruby's school, all rent and utilities paid. Tuition assistance if you choose a private program. Health insurance premiums for both of you. $75,000 to rebuild your savings." For one dangerous second, I pictured it. A bedroom for Ruby that did not belong to a program. A kitchen where every shelf was ours. 2 full years without calculating whether a lost shift would cost us the next month's rent. Martin watched my face. "You could leave the shelter this week. What do I sign?" His eyes moved to Daniel. Daniel reached for the agreement. Martin placed his hand over it. "I would prefer Claire hear the structure from me." "I prefer to read it," I said. He released the document. The first several pages described the apartment and payments. The next section required me to confirm that I had known of the Hawthorne Trust before turning 25. I read the line twice. "This is false. It is a clarification of the family understanding. It says I knew. You were informed through correspondence. I never received it. That is your recollection." Daniel turned another page. The agreement required me to ratify the continuation election, waive any right to pass rental income, approve all prior trustee actions, release Elaine and Martin from liability, and agree that Hawthorne could be transferred to Mallory Homes, LLC. A confidentiality clause barred me from discussing the trust, the shelter, the foundation event, or the settlement with anyone except my attorney and tax advisor. The penalty for disclosure was repayment of every benefit plus additional damages. I set the papers down. "You are not offering a home. You are renting my silence." Martin sighed as if I had misunderstood a generous gesture. "I am trying to prevent years of litigation from consuming the money that should support Ruby. The trust was created to support me, and your parents preserved it. By pretending I signed papers while I was giving birth. You keep repeating that as if an administrative date proves fraud. Where was the notary? We are reviewing the file. Who was my independent lawyer? We are reviewing that too. I looked at the settlement again. You want me to confirm something you cannot prove. I want you to acknowledge that family arrangements are rarely documented as neatly as attorneys prefer. Daniel's voice remained calm. The trust requires a notarized election and independent counsel. That is not an aesthetic preference. Martin ignored him. Claire, you are living in subsidized transitional housing. You have no permanent job and limited savings. This agreement gives your daughter stability immediately. I heard the message beneath the words. You are poor, therefore you are weak. You are weak, therefore the truth is negotiable. I asked, did Mom know Ruby and I were at the shelter? Martin's gaze shifted toward the window. She knew you were experiencing a housing crisis. That was not my question. Elaine knew you had contacted a shelter program. Did she know we were sleeping there? She believed the facility was safe. My hands went still. So she knew. She knew you had options. Hawthorne was an option. Hawthorne was occupied and under active management. By Mallory. Through Hawthorne Residential Services, he said. The foundation only used it for events. The trust owns it. Martin closed the folder. This is exactly why a settlement is necessary. You reduce every complex decision to an accusation. My daughter slept in a shelter while you prepared a nursery in my house. No one forced you to refuse your mother's help. There it was again. They had decided the conditions did not matter because I had refused them. Daniel asked, was the apartment offer contingent on Claire signing family authorization documents regarding Ruby? Martin looked at him. I was not part of that conversation. But you know about it. I know Elaine believed Claire needed support. Authority is not support, I said. Martin's composure slipped for only a second. You were losing your home. That did not make Ruby available for negotiation. He gathered the pages into a neat stack. The offer remains open for 48 hours. No. Daniel looked at me. You do not have to decide before reviewing every provision. I have reviewed the provision that requires me to lie. Martin leaned forward. Think carefully. Once this becomes public litigation, you do not control what people learn about your finances, your employment history, or your choices as a mother. Is that a warning? It is reality. You are threatening to shame me for needing help. I am explaining what your attorney is too polite to say. Daniel replied, I have explained the risks. I have not told her that poverty invalidates her rights. Martin stood. 48 hours. I said no. He buttoned his jacket. Then do not pretend the consequences were forced on you. After he left, I sat staring at the empty chair. Daniel did not congratulate me. He did not tell me I had been brave. He asked, Are you certain? My first instinct was anger. Then I understood why he had asked. The apartment was real. The money was real. Ruby's need for stability was real. A righteous answer did not erase any of those things. I am certain the document is false, I said. I am less certain I know how to explain to Ruby why I turned down a home. You did not turn down a home, Daniel said. You turned down a settlement with housing benefits. But emotionally, I understand that distinction may not help tonight. What happens now? We continue the emergency application. We request the full trust accounting, bank records, notary journal, and communications related to the proposed transfer. How long? The temporary order could come quickly. The rest will not. I looked through the cafe window. Martin was standing beside his car, speaking on the phone. He thinks time is on his side. It often is when one party has money and records, so we build our own. Daniel nodded. That afternoon, I picked Ruby up from school. A girl from her class pointed toward our car and whispered to her mother. Ruby waited until we had driven 2 blocks before speaking. Emma said Aunt Mallory's house is on the news. She said you are trying to take it. What do you think? I do not know. Everyone keeps saying different things. I explained that Hawthorne had been placed in a trust for me before Mallory moved there, and that my parents wanted me to sign a paper saying I had always known. Would signing give us a house? Ruby asked. An apartment for 2 years. Then why did you say no? Because after 2 years they could stop paying, and I would have signed their lie as if it were true. I do not want anyone to use our home to make decisions for us again. Ruby looked out the window. Nora said our little apartment is almost ready. It is. Can we stay at the shelter tonight? Yes. That is enough for tonight. 2 days later, after the final inspection, Nora handed us 2 metal keys. The transitional apartment had beige walls, a small kitchen, and 1 bedroom. Ruby placed her stuffed rabbit on the windowsill, then set the real key beside the cardboard one. Can I sleep in the bedroom? It is yours. Where will you sleep? The sofa folds out. She frowned. We can share. You have shared enough. For the first time since entering the shelter, she put her shoes beside the closet instead of lining them near the door. My phone rang. Aline. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message appeared. I played it at the kitchen table, not realizing Ruby had come to the bedroom doorway. You humiliated your sister, Elaine said. Your father offered you more than you deserve, and you answered by attacking this family. You could not even keep an apartment. A house like that would have been wasted on someone who couldn't even keep an apartment. You chose pride over your child's comfort. The message ended. I saved the original and sent it to Daniel, who later exported it with its metadata. Ruby stared at the phone. Does Grandma Elaine think the shelter was your fault? She wants me to believe that. Was it? We were safe there, but you deserved better than having family use a bed as a reward. Ruby looked toward the taped key on the table. I like our apartment. So do Rue, even if it is small. Especially because nobody made us sign away anything to enter it. That evening, Nora noticed the settlement papers during a routine check-in. My father offered 2 years of housing if I confirmed his lie, I said. I know why I refused. I still hate that Ruby pays part of the price. Would the agreement make your home independent of their permission? No. Then you did not reject stability. You rejected another condition attached to it. Over the next week, the court kept the restrictions in place at a preliminary hearing and ordered Elaine and Martin to provide tax returns, a preliminary accounting, and certification that records had been preserved. It was not ownership or a finding of fraud, but my parents could no longer change the papers faster than I could find them. I opened my laptop and began building a timeline from county records, tax filings, and archived management listings. Hawthorne Residential Services appeared in repair permits, rental advertisements, and insurance correspondence. Its registered agent was a commercial service, but the mailing address matched Martin's financial office. Payments moved from tenants to Hawthorne Residential Services. From there, regular transfers went to Bennett Advisory Group. Other payments covered renovations, catering expenses, and furniture delivered after Mallory moved in. I did not yet know which transactions were authorized trust expenses and which were not, but the pattern was no longer invisible. At 11:30, I sent Daniel the first spreadsheet. At 11:46, Nora called. Her voice sounded different from earlier. Claire, there is something I need to tell you. I closed the laptop. What happened? I reviewed the shelter's contact log after our conversation. Your mother called here before Evelyn's visit. My pulse slowed instead of quickening. When? 4 days after you and Ruby entered the shelter. I gripped the edge of the table. What did she ask? Nora paused. Your mother did not call to ask whether you and Ruby were safe. I met Nora in her office the next morning before Ruby's school bell. She had already printed the shelter's contact log and placed it face down on her desk. I need to explain what this is before you read it, she said. We document calls involving residents when the caller asks for information, raises a safety concern, or attempts to influence services. We do not confirm whether a family is staying here without authorization. Did you confirm we were here? No. Then how did my mother know? Nora turned the page over. The caller had identified herself as Elaine Bennett, Claire Bennett's mother. The entry was dated September 22nd, 4 days after Ruby and I entered the shelter. The note was written in Nora's careful handwriting. Caller asked whether Claire Bennett registered under her legal name. Caller asked whether resident had mentioned Hawthorne Street or a property dispute. Caller asked whether Evelyn Whitmore had contacted staff or visited the program. No information released. Caller stated she was attempting to prevent a private family matter from disrupting shelter operations. I read the entry twice. There was no question about Ruby, no request to speak to me, and no offer of help. Elaine had asked only about Hawthorne Evelyn and whether I had used my legal name. She knew, I said. Nora explained that the questions were unusual enough to document, but because she had released no information and I had not asked about family contact, she had not raised the call earlier. Once Hawthorne became a legal dispute, its meaning changed. Can Daniel use this? With your written authorization, the shelter can provide a certified, redacted copy. I can testify to the entry and our procedure. Outside the office, Ruby asked what the call had been about. Grandma Elaine knew we were staying at the shelter, I told her. Did she ask if we were okay? No. What did she ask? Whether I had learned about Hawthorne. Ruby looked down. Maybe she thought houses were more important than people. She made a choice that hurt us, I said. That is the truth. After I dropped her at school, I opened the Foundation's edited video. Our arrival had been removed, but Elaine's sentence remained beneath the blue door. No child should ever lie awake wondering where she will sleep tomorrow. I sent the public video and the call log notes to Daniel. This changes the moral picture, he said. Legally, we still have to connect it to the trust misconduct. I want the record to show that she knew where Ruby was sleeping. Courts decide claims, not every moral question. Then we make the evidence clear enough that no one can call this a misunderstanding. I spent the morning at the transitional apartment updating the timeline. September 18th, shelter admission. September 22nd, Elaine's call. October 5th, Evelyn's visit. October 6th, trust documents reviewed. October 7th, Hawthorne visit. October 8th, Foundation event. Every date connected to an action. Every action connected to a choice. At noon, Mallory texted, "We need to talk without Mom." I almost ignored her. Then another message appeared. "Dad wants me to sign something, saying you knew about Hawthorne." We met at a small park near Ruby's school. Mallory arrived wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. She chose a bench far from the playground. "You brought your lawyer?" she asked. "No." "Good." I told Daniel where I am and why. She removed the sunglasses. "You really cannot have one conversation without documenting it now." I had years of conversations. No one documented. Look where that left me. Mallory looked thinner than she had at Hawthorne. Dark circles showed beneath her eyes. "Dad gave me a declaration." "What does it say?" "That I understood you had declined the house and agreed the family should use it for foundation purposes." "Did you understand that?" "That is what Mom and Dad always said." "Did you ever see proof?" Mallory looked toward the playground. 6 months ago, an insurance notice came to Hawthorne. It had your name on it." "What exactly did it say?" "Claire Bennett Residence Trust. Beneficiary information enclosed." Margaret had been right. "What did you do?" I asked Mom. "And?" "She said the trust was old. She said you had rejected the property, but the name had to remain until the legal transfer was completed. Did that make sense to you?" "She said Dad's lawyers had handled it." "That was not my question." Mallory's mouth tightened. "No, it did not completely make sense." "Then why did you stop asking?" Her eyes flashed. "Because they told me the house would be mine." "Is that what you want to hear?" "It was not what I wanted. It was what she had chosen." "You knew there was a problem." "I knew there was paperwork I did not understand." "You work for the foundation. You were about to become its director. You understand enough to ask who owns the building you are being handed." "You think I wanted to believe Mom and Dad stole it from you?" "I think you wanted Hawthorne more than you wanted an answer." Mallory stood, then sat again, before anyone noticed. You always make everything sound simple. Ruby slept in a shelter. You were decorating a nursery in a trust named after me. Which part needs more complexity? Her face went pale. I did not know about the shelter until the week before the event. How? I heard Mom arguing with Dad. She said you were staying in some family program and that if they gave in, you would never learn. The words matched Elaine perfectly. What did Dad say? He said putting you in Hawthorne would expose the trust records. There it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not a forgotten document. A conscious reason to keep us away. Did you ask where Ruby was sleeping? Mallory looked down. No. Would you still have accepted the house if Evelyn had not appeared? She did not answer. That silence was the most honest thing she had given me. Mallory took a folded document from her bag. I did not sign Dad's declaration. Why not? Because it says I personally explained the trust to you in 2017. You did not. I know. Does Dad know you brought this to me? No. I did not reach for it. If you give me the original, Daniel will preserve it properly. I only have a copy. Then email it to him from the account where Dad sent it. Do not forward it to me first. Do not delete the original message. Mallory stared at me. You sound like one of them now. No. I sound like someone who learned what happens when truth is left in family hands. She folded the paper again. If I help you, can you keep my name out of this? I cannot promise that. I could lose my position. You were willing to accept a house based on a story you did not believe. So you want to punish me. I want you to tell the truth without demanding a reward first. Mallory's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. The foundation helps people, Claire. If this becomes public, donors will leave. Programs will close. Then the people running it should not have used their own daughter's shelter stay as leverage. You could settle quietly. That would protect the foundation's image, not its integrity. She stood. Mom says you have always hated that I stayed. I looked at her. I did not hate that you stayed. I hated that staying meant you were protected, while leaving meant I became disposable. Mallory's face changed. For a second, she looked like my little sister again. The girl who used to stand outside my bedroom while our parents argued and wait for me to tell her it was safe. Then, she put on her sunglasses. I will think about the email. Do not wait too long. Dad is already preparing to make you responsible. She froze. What do you mean? The draft transfer uses Mallory Homes LLC. The foundation expenses are being tied to your occupancy. If Martin needs someone to describe as the beneficiary of all those decisions, your name is already on the folder. She left without answering. That afternoon, Daniel called with another update. The temporary restraining order had stopped the deed transfer, but the title search showed a newly drafted management lien against Hawthorne. Martin's office claimed the trust owed Bennett Advisory Group for years of unpaid services and renovations. How much? $480,000. I nearly laughed. They want me to believe they protected the house for free? Then suddenly discovered $500,000 in fees when I appeared? The lien has not been recorded. The TRO prevents that. But the draft exists. What would it do? If upheld, it could reduce the value of the property or give Martin leverage in settlement. Are the charges real? Some expenses may be legitimate. The amount and timing are suspicious. We need invoices, contracts, approvals, and proof the work benefited the trust rather than Mallory or the foundation. I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop. We already saw foundation events and nursery furniture mixed into the expenses. Yes. Now we need records that can be authenticated. I told him what Mallory had said about Martin refusing to let us into Hawthorne because it would expose the files. Daniel did not react immediately. Will she repeat that under oath? I do not know. Then for now, it is information, not evidence. That distinction frustrated me, but I understood it. Truth was not the same as proof. A family could survive for years inside that distance. Evelyn arrived at the apartment before dinner with a bag of groceries. She had texted first and waited for permission. Ruby was building a house from empty pasta boxes on the living room floor. Evelyn sat nearby but did not rearrange anything or suggest better materials. I told her about Nora's log. Evelyn closed her eyes. She knew. Yes. I should make a statement. Not to the press. To the foundation board. Not yet. Evelyn looked at me. They need to know what Elaine did. They need evidence, not another family member making accusations. I created that foundation. And you do not control this case. Her expression hardened. I continued before she could respond. You do not contact reporters. You do not call Elaine. You do not pressure Mallory. You do not offer Patrick or anyone else money to help us. You do not negotiate with the board in my name. I am trying to help. Then help in the way I am asking. Ruby looked up from the cardboard house. Are you fighting? No, I said. We are making rules. Evelyn studied me for a long moment. What am I allowed to do? The question sounded painful for someone who had spent her life deciding. Tell Daniel everything you remember. Find records you legally possess. Answer questions truthfully. And be here without trying to purchase the outcome. Evelyn nodded. I can do that. Ruby held up a pasta box. This is the kitchen. Evelyn moved closer. Where should I put the door? Ruby handed her a piece of blue paper. Ask first. Evelyn looked at me, then back at Ruby. May I put it here? Ruby considered the spot. A little lower. Evelyn followed her instruction. That small act affected me more than any apology she had offered. After Ruby fell asleep, Daniel joined us by video call. He had reviewed the contact log summary, the foundation video, the draft lien, and the records gathered so far. The court can remove trustees for breach of duty, he said. The forged election, if proven, is serious. The attempted transfer and lien strengthen the request for oversight. What is missing? I asked. A direct link between the people and the acts. We have their names on the forms. We have signatures and initials. They will say staff prepared documents, accountants moved money, or errors occurred without fraudulent intent. Martin already tried to blame Elaine. And Elaine will say Martin handled the finances. Mallory will say she relied on both. Evelyn leaned toward the screen. What would prove it? Original instruction. Email, correspondence, notary records, accounting notes, anything showing who ordered the signature matched, who approved the false address, and where the rental money went. I looked at my timeline. So until then, they can call 9 years an accounting mistake. They can try. Evelyn had gone very still. I noticed her looking toward the hallway, as if she were seeing another room. What? I asked. There was an archive, she said slowly. When I retired, my old estate files were moved to a private storage facility. Elaine wanted them destroyed, but I refused. Would trust records be there? Copies of my correspondence, early accountings, instructions from the first years. She gripped the handle of her cane. Possibly more, Daniel asked. Who controls access? I do. I closed the laptop halfway. For the first time since Nora showed me the call log, I felt something other than anger. Not hope. Direction. Evelyn looked at me. We can go tomorrow. I reopened the laptop. First, Daniel verifies the storage account and preservation process. Then we go together. Evelyn nodded. This time, she did not argue. The private storage facility was separate from the official trust formation file we had reviewed downtown. It did not look like a place where 9 years of my life could be hidden. It stood behind Evelyn's former law firm, a gray concrete building with no windows and a keypad beside the steel door. Daniel met us outside with Evelyn's retired estate counsel, Miriam Shaw, and a records technician carrying a camera and inventory sheets. Miriam made the rules clear before anyone entered. No one removes, rearranges, or writes on anything until it has been photographed and logged. If we find material related to Hawthorne, the originals remain in counsel's custody. Claire and Daniel receive certified copies. Evelyn looked at me. This is slower than opening a box. Slow is better than giving Martin a reason to challenge it, I said. She nodded. 3 weeks had passed since Nora showed me the shelter call log. The temporary restraining order remained in place. Ruby and I were settled into the transitional apartment, and I had begun contract work reviewing leases from home. We were safer than before, but Hawthorne remained frozen behind court orders and unanswered questions. Miriam entered the access code. Inside, shelves rose from floor to ceiling. Each carton carried a number, retention date, and description. The technician photographed the room before touching the first box. Evelyn had not exaggerated. Her old estate files filled an entire aisle. The Hawthorne records were divided across 4 cartons. The first contained purchase documents, repair estimates, insurance policies, and early trust accountings. The second held correspondence. The third contained education support records. The fourth had been sealed after Evelyn retired. Miriam opened the correspondence carton first. Every envelope was photographed before being placed on the table. Some had been returned with yellow postal stickers. Others carried delivery confirmations signed at my parents' address. Elaine Bennett appeared again and again. Sometimes Martin signed. Sometimes an employee at Martin's office did. None carried my signature. The first letter Evelyn sent after my 25th birthday congratulated me on receiving control of Hawthorne. She asked whether I wanted the current tenants to remain or whether she should help arrange a move. The envelope had been accepted at my parents' house. I had been living 12 miles away. The next letter asked whether I had chosen a property manager. The next included contact information for an independent attorney. I had never seen any of them. My mother had not merely kept a house from me. She had stood between every question and its answer. Miriam opened a folder, labeled Educational Benefit. Inside were copies of checks payable to the Claire Bennett Residence Trust for Claire's educational benefit. Because my parents were co-trustees, they had been legally able to deposit them into the trust account. They had not been free to spend them on themselves. I remembered the year I left community college. Ruby was not born yet. I worked mornings at a leasing office and evenings at a restaurant. The final tuition payment came due 2 weeks after my car needed repairs. I called Evelyn once from the college parking lot. Her number had been disconnected. Elaine told me Evelyn had changed it because she did not want me asking for money. I withdrew from 2 classes and promised myself I would return the following semester. I never did. Daniel placed a trust ledger beside the checks. Several deposits matched Evelyn's education payments. Within weeks, portions moved into categories labeled administrative review, property consulting, and trustee support. The descriptions sounded official. The recipients were Bennett Advisory Group and a consulting company connected to one of Martin's business partners. Could those expenses be legitimate? I asked. Some trustee expenses can be, Daniel said. But educational funds must benefit you. We need invoices, contracts, and proof of service. Miriam found several invoices in the 4th carton. The amounts matched the ledger, but the descriptions referred to strategic family asset planning and foundation development. Nothing mentioned my education. Daniel marked each item for certified copying. This is potential self-dealing, he said. It is different from Martin simply taking a check written to you. The deposits were legal. The use may not have been. The distinction mattered. It made the betrayal less dramatic on paper and more deliberate in practice. My parents had not stolen a check from my mailbox and spent it at a store. They had used their authority to rename my opportunities as administrative costs. I sat with the withdrawal form from my college in my memory. I could still see the counselor asking whether I was certain. I had said I needed 1 semester. 9 years later, I was looking at money that had existed for the exact purpose I could not afford. Evelyn stood across the table. I should have reviewed every accounting. Yes, I trusted Elaine and Martin. That is what you keep saying. They were your parents. They were also the people with access to every letter, every statement, and every explanation. Evelyn's face tightened. I had no reason then to believe they would do this. You had me. She looked at me. You had a granddaughter who stopped answering every letter at the same time she supposedly signed away the house, refused educational help, changed her address, and wanted nothing from you. You decided the people controlling all the information were more believable than the person who had suddenly gone silent. I believed I was respecting your wishes. You believed the version delivered by the people with power. Miriam and the technician moved to the far end of the room. Daniel remained nearby, but did not interfere. Evelyn touched the edge of the table. You are right. I wanted her to argue. I wanted a place to put the years I had spent believing I had been rejected. Instead, she accepted the accusation, leaving me with the fact that regret could not reopen a classroom or give Ruby back her first 6 years with a great-grandmother who had wanted her. Evelyn reached toward her handbag. Her fingers stopped before opening it. I knew what she had almost done. You cannot write a check that makes this even, I said. I know. Do you? She lowered her hand. I was going to offer to replace the education money. That money should be restored through the trust accounting. I do not want another relative deciding what I need and presenting it as love. I was trying to repair the harm. Then ask me what repair looks like. Evelyn was silent. I heard the technician turning pages at the other table. Finally, Evelyn picked up her cane. I think you need space from me. I do. She left without asking whether she should send a car, pay for lunch, or arrange anything else. That was the first thing she did that day, which felt like listening. Miriam continued the inventory after Evelyn left. Near the bottom of the correspondence carton, she found a card with a silver cradle on the front. I already knew the handwriting. Daniel had shown me a copy, but this was the original. The paper carried a faint crease where someone had opened and folded it again. My dear Claire, your mother told me the baby arrived safely. I hope you know there will always be room for both of you at Hawthorne, whether you need it now or years from now. I will not intrude, but I will not stop loving you. Evaine. Attached to the envelope was a delivery record. Elaine Bennett had signed for it 3 days after Ruby's birth. I stared at the date. While I was recovering from delivery, my mother received a card saying Hawthorne had room for us. She had kept the card. She had also allowed a continuation election carrying my false signature to remain in the trust file. I imagined Elaine standing in her kitchen, reading Evelyn's words, and deciding I did not need to see them. That image hurt more than the missing tuition money. Money could be counted. A relationship lost through silence had no reliable total. When I returned to the apartment, Ruby was building a tower from books beside the sofa. Nora had picked her up from school and stayed until I arrived. Where is Evelyn? Ruby asked. She went home. Did you fight? We disagreed. Ruby removed the top book from the tower. Is she going to disappear again? I sat on the floor beside her. I do not know what Evelyn will do. You said she was sorry. Being sorry does not always mean someone knows how to stay. Ruby traced the edge of the book. Will you disappear? No. You cannot promise that. People get sick and have accidents. The words sounded like something she had heard at school. I chose my answer carefully. I cannot promise nothing will ever happen to me. I can promise I will not choose to vanish and let someone else tell you a lie about why. Ruby looked at me. And if we have to move again? I will tell you what is happening. I will not hide a home from you. I will not make you earn the right to stay by agreeing with me. She placed the book back on the tower. That is better than forever. That evening, Martin called. I want to speak without Elaine. Daniel has to know. He can know. He does not need to sit beside you. We agreed to meet the next morning in the lobby cafe of a downtown hotel. Daniel remained available by phone and had the location and meeting time. Martin arrived alone. He looked older than he had at the settlement meeting. His tie was slightly crooked, and a red mark crossed the bridge of his nose where his glasses had rested. I heard you opened Evelyn's archives, he said. How? Her former counsel notified the trustees that records had been preserved. Then you know we found the education ledgers. Martin looked toward the hotel entrance. Elaine designed the communication strategy. Communication strategy? The letters. The distance between you and Evelyn. Elaine believed direct contact would destabilize the family. You signed for some of the mail. I handled whatever came to the house. You approved the accounting entries. I relied on accountants. You are a financial advisor. That does not mean I personally classified every expense. He folded his hands on the table. Your mother was afraid Evelyn would use Hawthorne to pull you away from us. I was already away. You were angry. I was controlled. Martin exhaled. Elaine made emotional decisions. I dealt with the documents that followed. You say that as if documents move by themselves. I am willing to cooperate. What does cooperation cost? I testify that Elaine directed the communications and insisted the trust continue. In return, you agree not to pursue the maximum civil recovery against me personally. You want me to believe you were your wife's clerk. I am saying there are degrees of responsibility. Did you know Ruby and I were at the shelter? His gaze lowered to the table. Elaine mentioned it. When? Before the foundation event. What did you do? I told her contacting you would reopen Hawthorne. The words were flat and exact. He had known. He had not believed the shelter was a lesson. He had viewed it as a threat to the paperwork. My daughter was sleeping in a dormitory. The shelter was safe. So that made it acceptable? I believed a confrontation would make the situation worse. For whom? Martin looked at me. You are angry. I understand. No, you understand exposure. That is why you are here. He pushed his chair back. My offer to cooperate will not remain open forever. It is not an offer. It is another attempt to decide how much truth I am allowed to keep. I stood. If you want to cooperate, tell Daniel everything without conditions. Martin did not follow me. 2 days later, Daniel called about the records box from Hawthorne. The man who had carried it toward the van was Martin's executive assistant, Owen Pierce. Owen had received a subpoena and hired his own attorney. Rather than risk contempt, he produced the box exactly as it had been stored. Daniel arranged for the contents to be inventoried under supervision. The box held duplicate vendor invoices, draft lien documents, occupancy expense schedules, and printed emails. Several invoices charged the trust for nursery furniture, foundation catering, and landscaping installed before the Home Begins Here event. The printed emails showed Martin directing staff to move certain expenses between Hawthorne Residential Services and Bennett Advisory Group, but Daniel warned me not to celebrate. Printouts can be challenged. We need native electronic records with metadata or matching business records produced directly by the companies. Does the box help? It establishes what was being moved after the preservation notice. It gives us document names, dates, and people to subpoena. The brown box had received its payoff. Martin's attempt to move it had not destroyed the case. It had drawn a circle around the records he feared. That same afternoon, Daniel received a message from Patrick Cole, Martin's former accountant. Patrick did not contact me directly. He contacted Daniel because he had kept reconciliation schedules and native email exports from the years he worked for Bennett Advisory Group. Daniel arranged the meeting at his office. Patrick brought his own attorney and an encrypted drive sealed in an evidence bag. A forensic technician created a working copy while preserving the original media. Patrick sat across from me, twisting his wedding ring. I should have asked more questions, he said. What did you see? Management fees that did not match the property work. Transfers between the trust account, Hawthorne Residential Services, and Bennett Advisory Group. Martin said the beneficiary had consented to keep the structure private. Did you ever see my consent? A scanned continuation election. The one signed on Ruby's birthday. He looked down. Yes. Why did you believe it? Because it was in the legal file. Because Martin was my employer. Because asking whether the owner had forged a beneficiary's signature felt like accusing everyone in the room. So you accepted the easier answer. Yes. Patrick did not ask me to forgive him. He said he began reviewing his old records after seeing news from the foundation event. When he learned Ruby and I had been in a shelter, the management fees stopped looking like technical irregularities. They had consequences, he said. I had treated them like numbers. The forensic technician confirmed the drive contained native email files, not screenshots. One message from Martin instructed Patrick to match the beneficiary's signature to the 2016 file before circulating the final election. Another directed him to move renovation expenses through Hawthorne Residential Services, so the trust accounting would show a single management charge rather than individual foundation and occupancy costs. Martin had not been Elaine's clerk. He had designed the financial language that made their choices harder to see. Patrick's attorney made it clear that no one had promised him immunity or protection from civil claims. His cooperation would be disclosed truthfully. Daniel would subpoena matching corporate records to authenticate the emails independently. Before Patrick left, he gave us one more warning. Martin is preparing to say Mallory requested every renovation and that occupancy payments were authorized for her benefit. He wants the records to make her look like the person who directed Hawthorne. He is blaming his daughter, I said. He is preparing to. That evening, Evelyn knocked on the apartment door. She had texted first. She carried no bags, files, or envelopes. When I opened the door, she remained in the hallway. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Not what can I buy. Not where should I move you. What do you need me to do?" "Come in," I said. She sat at the kitchen table while I told her about Martin, the records box, and Patrick's emails. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I will give Daniel every record he requests. I will testify. I will not contact Elaine or the board unless you approve it. That is what I need. Does this mean you forgive me?" "No." The answer hurt her, but she nodded. "Then, I will not ask again." My phone rang before I could say more. Mallory's name appeared on the screen. When I answered, she was crying so hard that I could barely understand her. "Claire, they want me to sign an affidavit." "Who?" "Mom and Dad. It says I managed Hawthorne. It says I approved the renovations and all the payments." "Did you?" "No, not like this." Her breath broke. "Dad says if I do not sign, he will tell the court I acted without authorization. Mom says this is the only way to protect the family." I looked across the table at Evelyn. The family had found its next person to sacrifice. "Do not sign anything," I said. Mallory whispered. "Then tell me what I am supposed to do." Mallory arrived at Daniel's office the next morning, carrying the affidavit in a white envelope. Her eyes were swollen, and she kept both hands around the envelope, as if our parents might reach through the walls and take it back. Daniel invited her to sit, then explained that he represented me alone. "I cannot advise you," he said. "You should have your own attorney before signing anything or giving a formal statement." Mallory looked at me. "Can you tell him you will not come after me if I help?" "No." Her face tightened. "I called you because they are trying to blame me. And 6 months ago you saw my name on the insurance notice and stayed quiet because you wanted Hawthorne. I told you I was sorry. You told me you were scared. What is the difference? Being scared explains why you called. It does not erase what you did before that." Mallory pushed the envelope across the table. The affidavit said she had supervised the Hawthorne renovations, approved the foundation's use of the property, and directed Hawthorne Residential Services to classify certain expenses as trust maintenance. It also said she had been told I knew about the property and did not object. The first part shifted financial responsibility toward Mallory. The final sentence protected our parents. "They want you to confess to decisions you did not make and repeat a story you already know may be false," I said. "Dad said it was the only way to show the expenses benefited the family." "Which family?" She looked down. "Daniel recommended that Mallory preserve the affidavit, the email that delivered it, and every related message. He gave her the names of 3 independent attorneys. Mallory did not take the list. I cannot afford a legal fight." "You live in a house held for my benefit," I said. "You work for a foundation my parents control. You have had resources around you your entire life. That does not mean they belong to me." "No. It means you are finally seeing the difference between being protected and being secure." She stared at me. "You are enjoying this?" The accusation surprised me. Watching our parents prepare to sacrifice you does not make me happy. You always wanted me to admit they loved me more. I wanted you to notice what that love required. Mallory stood. If I cooperate, I could lose my job, my home, and my family. Ruby and I already lost our home. You did not ask what cooperation would cost us then. Her eyes filled again. What do you want me to do? Tell the truth without making me purchase it. She took the attorney list and left the affidavit with Daniel for copying. The original remained in her possession until her lawyer could arrange formal production. After she left, I spread my timeline across Daniel's conference table. What began as 6 dates had become 4 months of records. I had color-coded each category. Blue marked property ownership, green marked rental income, yellow marked letters and notices, red marked false documents, gray marked foundation expenses, pink marked everything involving Ruby and the shelter. Daniel studied the wall. This is more organized than some litigation support files. I used to review lease portfolios with hundreds of tenants. Every error looked harmless until you placed it beside the next one. I added Patrick's emails beneath Martin's draft lien. The pattern was becoming clear. Hawthorne Residential Services collected rent and paid ordinary expenses. Bennett Advisory Group then charged the trust broad management fees. Foundation costs and Mallory's personal occupancy expenses were hidden inside those charges. One invoice caught my attention. Community family room renovation. The amount was $43,000. The invoice date matched the month Mallory began preparing the nursery. I pulled the vendor schedule from the records box. The same contractor had installed cloud shelves, custom wallpaper, a child-size bed, and built-in cabinets. Community family room meant Mallory's nursery. The trust had paid to prepare a bedroom for her future child, while Ruby slept in a shelter. Daniel warned me that improper expense classification alone did not prove the entire renovation was unauthorized. But it proves they knew how it would look if they called it a nursery, I said. It supports that inference. We still need the contractor records and payment instructions. Daniel issued subpoenas for the vendor invoices, banking records, trust files, and electronic communications. Patrick's attorney arranged for him to produce the native emails and reconciliation schedules. Patrick agreed to testify without immunity, or any promise that civil claims would disappear. I kept telling myself I was only an employee, he said during preparation. Then I saw the footage from Hawthorne and understood that the numbers had left a child without a home. Independent records supported him. Margaret's historical photographs showed tenants moving through Hawthorne, Martin supervising work, and Mallory collecting a county envelope with my name visible. Former tenants produced leases naming the Claire Bennett Residence Trust as landlord, along with rent receipts and repair emails that matched Patrick's schedules and the bank records. One tenant remembered asking Martin whether Claire was a real person. Martin had said the beneficiary knew about the property, but preferred privacy. My father had used my name to reassure tenants, while telling me the trust did not exist. The case no longer depended on one frightened accountant or one angry daughter. It rested on records from banks, vendors, tenants, public filings, and my parents' own communications. Evelyn prepared her sworn declaration with separate counsel. She described creating the trust, selecting my parents as temporary trustees, sending letters, receiving the false request for no contact, and failing to verify whether the request came from me. Daniel sent me a copy, only after Evelyn authorized it. She did not minimize her own failure. I believed Elaine because she was my daughter. I treated my granddaughter's silence as consent because doing so spared me from the possibility that Claire had rejected me. That choice allowed the deception to continue. I called Evelyn after reading it. You did not have to write that last part. Yes, I did. It gives their lawyer something to use against you. It is true. For once, she was not trying to appear stronger than the record. The next day, Elaine released a public statement through the foundation. My mother is nearly 80 years old and has recently demonstrated serious lapses in judgment. My estranged daughter is exploiting her confusion to reopen a matter settled years ago. The statement did not mention the trust. It did not mention the false signature. It did not mention the shelter. It turned Evelyn's age into the entire story. Evelyn called me within minutes. I want to sue her. Not now. She called me incompetent. She wants us distracted. My reputation matters. So does the hearing. Evelyn's voice sharpened. You think I should allow my own daughter to declare me senile? I think you should let your independent lawyer document your capacity and let Daniel use the trust records. We do not need another lawsuit to prove you are angry. I am not merely angry. I know. But if we react to every insult, Elaine still controls where we look. There was a long pause. You sound like I used to, Evelyn said. I hope not entirely. She gave a quiet laugh. No, not entirely. Her independent physician completed a capacity assessment at her request. Daniel did not rely on the result alone. He relied on recorded deeds, archived correspondence, estate counsel, and years of consistent financial decisions. The case was about documents and fiduciary duties, not whether Evelyn remembered what she ate for breakfast. Elaine's next move involved Ruby. The school secretary called me on a Wednesday afternoon. Your mother is here with gifts, she said. She is asking to see Ruby. My whole body went cold. Do not bring Ruby to the office. We will not. Elaine Bennett is not on the pickup list. What exactly did she say? She said this was a family emergency and that you were preventing contact because of a property dispute. I am coming. By the time I reached the school, Elaine was standing outside the administrative office with 2 shopping bags and a large stuffed horse. She looked offended, rather than embarrassed. You did not answer my calls. All communication goes through the lawyers. This is not about lawyers. I came to see my granddaughter. You knew where she was sleeping and did not come then. Her mouth tightened. You are using Ruby to punish me. No. I am protecting her from an adult who makes help conditional and tells her mother's private struggles to other people. I am her grandmother. That is a relationship, not a license. The principal stepped into the hallway. I gave her a written notice confirming that only Nora, Evelyn, with advance permission, and I could pick Ruby up. No relative was to meet with her, deliver gifts, or remove her from class without my written approval. Elaine stared at the paper. You are making me look dangerous. You came to her school after being told contact must go through counsel. I brought birthday gifts. Her birthday was 6 months ago. Elaine looked at the stuffed horse, as if she had forgotten what explanation she planned to use. The principal asked her to leave. She did, but not before telling me. One day Ruby will understand that you kept her from people who loved her. I waited until the door closed. Then I asked the school to document the entire incident. That evening, Ruby noticed the new pickup list on the refrigerator. Did Grandma Elaine come to school? Yes. Why did they not tell me? Because she did not have permission. Ruby looked relieved. I do not want to talk to her yet. You do not have to. Will she be mad? Probably. Ruby considered that. Does being mad make permission change? No. She nodded. Good. Daniel called 2 days later with 2 options. My parents were willing to discuss a confidential settlement. Under the proposed terms, Hawthorne would be distributed to me. The trustees would resign. An independent accountant would review part of the rental history. The foundation and Mallory would receive releases for certain claims. The settlement would remain sealed. No public testimony, no certified shelter log in the court record. No formal finding about the false election or the attempted transfer. The second option was to continue toward a final evidentiary hearing. That meant discovery, witnesses, expert review, and months of uncertainty. It also meant my finances and family history could be examined publicly unless the court granted limited protections. What do you recommend? I asked. I recommend you decide what outcome matters most. That sounds like avoiding the question. It is the answer. If the priority is receiving Hawthorne quickly and reducing the pressure on Ruby, settlement has real value. If the priority is a complete accounting and an official record, the hearing offers more opportunity and more risk. I asked for one night. Ruby and I ate grilled cheese at the small kitchen table. After dinner, she taped a new tooth onto her cardboard key. "What scares you most right now?" I asked. She thought I meant darkness or school. "About the house," I added. "And Grandma Elaine." Ruby looked down at the key. "I do not like when grown-ups say one thing and do another." "What do you mean?" "Grandma said she wanted to help families, but she did not help us. Grandpa said the papers were normal, but he wanted Aunt Mallory to sign different papers. Aunt Mallory said she did not know, but she saw your name." Her words were simple. That made them impossible to hide from. "Would you feel safer if we got Hawthorne without talking about any of that in court? Would they still say it was a misunderstanding?" "Yes. Then everyone could do it again." I did not tell Ruby that courts could not guarantee people changed, but silence could guarantee they kept their version. The next morning, I told Daniel to proceed toward the hearing. "We request every privacy protection available for Ruby," I said. "Her school records, shelter details, and personal information stay limited to what is necessary. I will file the motions, and I do not want press statements." "Understood." My decision did not feel triumphant. It felt expensive. Mallory contacted Daniel through her new attorney that afternoon. She had agreed to preserve and produce emails from Elaine and Martin. Her decision came after Martin's counsel sent a draft response, claiming Mallory had independently directed the Hawthorne occupancy and renovations. Our parents had finally made the mistake I knew they would. They treated the favored child as disposable the moment she became useful as a shield. One email from Elaine had been sent 6 months earlier after Mallory received the county notice. "Do not let Claire see another county notice. Once Mallory moves in, she will stop asking questions." The pronoun was unclear. Claire would stop asking questions, or Mallory would. Either interpretation showed Elaine understood the notices were dangerous. Another message instructed Mallory to forward all Hawthorne mail to Martin's office and not discuss the trust with me. Patrick's authenticated emails supplied the financial half. "Match the beneficiary's signature to the 2016 file before circulating the final election. Move the nursery and event expenses under the consolidated management charge." The words were ordinary. That was their power. No villain called his own act theft in an email. He called it consolidation. He called forgery matching. He called concealment privacy. I placed the emails on the timeline board. For months, part of me had imagined one final document would force my parents to look at me and admit everything. That hope disappeared as the board filled. No amount of evidence would transform them into the people I had needed. Evidence could establish what they did. It could not make them sorry for the right reason. I stopped waiting for an apology before moving forward. Because Martin had attempted both a deed transfer and a management lien after the dispute surfaced, the judge ordered an expedited discovery schedule. 4 months after Evelyn found us at the shelter, the final evidentiary hearing began. Daniel waited at the courthouse entrance. Evelyn stood beside him with her own attorney. Patrick and Nora would arrive later under subpoena. I carried 2 document boxes organized by date, witness, and transaction. Daniel reached for one. "I have it," I said. He opened the courthouse door, but did not step ahead of me. Neither did Evelyn. I walked inside first. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. There was no jury, no row of reporters, and no dramatic line separating innocent people from guilty ones. There were wooden benches, 2 counsel tables, a clerk, and a judge who had already read thousands of pages before any of us entered. Elaine sat beside Martin at the opposite table. Mallory sat behind them with her own attorney, far enough away to make the distance visible. My mother wore navy and pearls. My father had placed 3 binders in front of him and aligned their edges with the table. They looked prepared. For years, preparation had been their greatest weapon. They controlled the documents, the addresses, the explanations, and the people who were allowed to ask questions. This time, The records were not all in their hands. Daniel leaned toward me. Answer only what is asked. If you do not know, say you do not know. I nodded. The judge began by identifying the issues before the court. Whether the continuation election was valid, whether Elaine and Martin had breached their duties as trustees, whether the attempted transfer and management lien were authorized, whether they should be removed and required to provide a complete accounting. The judge made one point clear. This proceeding will not decide criminal liability. Any evidence suggesting criminal conduct may be referred to the appropriate authorities, but this court is addressing the trust and related civil remedies. Martin's attorney began with the version of me my parents had spent years constructing. Claire Bennett had rejected her family. Claire had refused financial guidance. Claire had changed jobs, lost an apartment, and returned only after Evelyn grew older. The attorney described the dispute as a daughter reconsidering a decision after learning that Hawthorne had increased in value. I listened without reacting. He never said I knew the trust's name. He never identified the lawyer who supposedly advised me. He never explained why my signature had been notarized while I was giving birth. He spoke around those facts, because speaking through them would have required answers. The first witness was Miriam Shaw, Evelyn's retired estate counsel. She authenticated the original trust agreement and the certified deed recorded in 2008. The trust was irrevocable. The Claire Bennett Residence Trust held legal title to Hawthorne. I was the sole beneficiary. Elaine and Martin were temporary co-trustees. The trust required them to distribute the deed when I turned 25 unless, before that distribution date, I personally signed a notarized election after receiving independent legal advice. Could Elaine Bennett or Martin Bennett extend the trust without Claire's valid election? Daniel asked. No. Could they replace Claire with another beneficiary? No. Could they transfer Hawthorne to Mallory Homes LLC for the benefit of their other daughter? Not under this trust. Martin's attorney showed Miriam the continuation election. Does this appear to comply on its face? No. It is dated 2020, 3 years after the mandatory distribution date. It contains the required sections, does it not? It contains headings and signatures. A late document could not retroactively preserve trustee authority from 2017. The attorney asked whether errors occurred in old estate files. They do, Miriam said. Then the date could be an administrative mistake. A missing notary journal, no independent attorney, a false address, and a beneficiary hospitalized on the signing date require more than that explanation. The judge wrote something down. Evelyn testified next. Her own attorney sat behind her, but she answered Daniel's questions without looking toward anyone for approval. She described purchasing Hawthorne, creating the trust, and selecting my parents because she believed they would protect me if I ever needed stability. Why did you not contact Claire directly when the deed was supposed to be distributed? Daniel asked. I did contact her. My letters were delivered to Elaine and Martin's address. I received a response bearing Claire's name that said she wanted no relationship with me. Did you verify that Claire wrote it? No. Why not? Evelyn looked at me before answering. Because accepting the letter allowed me to believe I was respecting her wishes. In reality, I was protecting myself from rejection. Elaine looked away. Martin's attorney stood. You are nearly 80 years old, correct? Yes. You have retired from active business. Yes. And your memory is not perfect. No one's is. The attorney asked whether Evelyn remembered every clause of the trust without looking at documents. No. Then, it is possible you misunderstood what authority the trustees retained. No. The attorney who drafted it has explained the language, and the document speaks for itself. You recently underwent a capacity evaluation. At my request, after my daughter publicly suggested I was confused, because there was concern. Because Elaine needed the court to doubt the person who created the trust. The judge told both attorneys to move on. Patrick Cole testified after lunch. His voice shook during the first several questions. Then Daniel showed him the original reconciliation schedules produced from Martin's company server. Patrick explained how rental income moved from tenants into Hawthorne Residential Services and then into the trust account. From there, Bennett Advisory Group charged broad management fees. Some covered legitimate expenses. Others absorbed foundation events, Mallory's occupancy costs, nursery renovations, and consulting services unrelated to my benefit. Daniel displayed the email instructing Patrick to match the beneficiary signature to the 2016 file. "What did you understand that instruction to mean?" he asked. "That the signature on the continuation election should resemble Claire Bennett's signature from an older document. Who sent it?" "Martin Bennett." Martin's attorney rose. "Did Mr. Bennett tell you to forge a signature?" "He did not use that word." "Did you personally copy the signature?" "No." "Then you cannot testify that Martin created the false signature." "No. I can testify that he told me to have it matched to an older file." The attorney produced earlier emails showing Patrick had processed the records without objection. "You continued working for Mr. Bennett for 3 years." "Yes." "You accepted a salary." "Yes." "You did not report fraud." "No." "So now that your former employer faces litigation, you are protecting yourself." Patrick looked toward me. "I am trying to stop protecting myself." The courtroom remained quiet. Bank records produced directly by the financial institutions matched Patrick's schedules. Vendor records matched the invoices found in the box Martin attempted to move after receiving the preservation notice. The nursery contractor testified by deposition that Mallory selected colors and furniture, but payment instructions came from Martin's office. The project was described on invoices as a community family room because Martin's assistant requested that wording. The $43,000 nursery had been paid through the trust. Margaret Hale authenticated her photographs and described the rental families who lived at Hawthorne before Mallory. One image showed Mallory holding the county envelope with my name visible. Another showed Martin meeting contractors outside the house. A former tenant testified that his lease identified the Claire Bennett Residence Trust as the landlord. He had once asked Martin whether Claire was a real person. Martin told him the beneficiary knew about the property, but preferred privacy. "I had not even known the street." Mallory testified in the afternoon. She kept her eyes on the judge. She admitted seeing my name on the insurance notice 6 months before Evelyn found me. "What did Elaine tell you?" Daniel asked. "She said Claire had rejected Hawthorne, and her name remained only because the transfer process was incomplete." "Did you believe her?" "I wanted to." "Why?" "Because they had promised me the house." Mallory admitted she did not ask for the trust agreement. She admitted she continued preparing the nursery after hearing that Ruby and I were experiencing housing problems. She also authenticated the email, telling her not to let me see another county notice. Martin's attorney asked whether Mallory directed the renovations. "I chose the wallpaper and furniture." "So the expenses were for your benefit?" "Yes." "And you expected to receive the property?" "Yes." "Then your parents were acting on your requests." Mallory finally looked toward Martin. "They were also telling me the house belonged to them. When the case began, Dad tried to make me sign an affidavit, saying I approved the financial classifications. I did not." Her attorney provided the affidavit and the original email transmitting it. Elaine's attorney tried a different approach. "Your mother protected you your entire life, did she not?" Mallory's mouth trembled. "She protected me while I was useful to her." Elaine closed her eyes. Nora testified the next morning. The shelter's certified contact log was admitted with unrelated resident information removed. Nora explained the shelter's policy and confirmed she wrote the entry on the day Elaine called. Daniel asked her to read the questions Elaine had asked. Whether I registered under my legal name, whether I had mentioned Hawthorne Street, whether Evelyn Whitmore had contacted the shelter. Did Elaine ask whether Claire or Ruby needed assistance? Daniel asked. No. Did she ask whether Ruby was safe? No. Did she request to speak with Claire? No. Elaine's attorney argued that Nora could not know Elaine's intentions. Nora agreed. I can only testify to what she asked and what she did not ask. Elaine took the stand after Nora. She presented herself as a mother forced to make difficult decisions for an irresponsible daughter. She said I had rejected guidance for years. She said she believed Hawthorne would be wasted if placed under my control. Did you know Claire and Ruby were staying at the family shelter? Daniel asked. I knew she had entered a safe program. Why did you call? To prevent a private property disagreement from disrupting services. Why did you ask whether Claire had mentioned Hawthorne? Because I knew she might use the situation to reopen old resentment. Why did you not tell her Hawthorne existed when she asked you for temporary housing? Elaine looked toward the judge. Because giving her access to a valuable property during a crisis would have rewarded another irresponsible decision. Did you consider Ruby's need for housing? The shelter was safe. Daniel allowed the answer to remain in the room. He did not repeat it. He did not need to. Martin testified that he relied on lawyers, accountants, and Elaine's communications. He described the false election as an administrative irregularity and the attempted transfer as an estate planning draft. Daniel showed him the email about matching my signature. What legal advice were you requesting in that message? Martin adjusted his glasses. I was asking staff to make the document consistent. Consistent with Claire's actual signature? With the file. Did Claire sign it? I believed she had agreed to the continuation. That was not the question. Martin looked toward his attorney. No. I did not personally see her sign. Did you identify an independent lawyer for her? I cannot recall. Did you verify the notary journal? No. Did you tell a tenant Claire knew about Hawthorne? I may have. Did you know she did not? I knew she had been informed through her parents. You were one of her parents. Martin stopped answering for several seconds. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness chair and swore to tell the truth. Daniel began with my employment, the apartment loss, and the shelter. I did not pretend I had managed every part of my life perfectly. I lost my job. I underestimated how quickly my savings would disappear. I needed help. Did any of those events cause you to sign the continuation election? No. Did you know Hawthorne existed before Evelyn found you? No. Why did you reject your parents' settlement? Because it required me to say I knew about the trust, approve everything they had done, release the rental accounting, and remain silent. What were you offered? An apartment for 2 years, school expenses, and money. Why was that difficult to refuse? Because Ruby needed stability. I looked toward the gallery. Ruby was not there. I had not brought her into the courtroom. She had already slept in a shelter. I knew saying no meant the case would take months, but signing would have taught her that a safe home could be exchanged for a lie. Daniel showed me Evelyn's letters. What did losing these cost you? I held the silver cradle card. A relationship with my grandmother. Educational opportunities. The knowledge that someone had prepared a place for us. He displayed the trust ledger and rental history. What did losing Hawthorne cost you? Security. Then he asked the question that mattered most. What do you believe Elaine and Martin took from you? I looked at my parents. They took the right to know what belonged to me. They took my voice and placed it beneath documents I never signed. They took letters, tuition, rent, and years with my grandmother. My throat tightened, but I continued. And when my daughter had nowhere permanent to sleep, they knew. They still chose to protect the secret. Elaine leaned toward her attorney, but her voice carried. She is destroying this family over one house. The judge looked toward her. Daniel did not stop me from answering. You chose the house over your daughter and your granddaughter long before I ever learned it existed. Elaine's face went still. The judge issued the written decision 2 weeks later. The continuation election was declared invalid. The court found that Elaine and Martin breached their fiduciary duties by concealing the trust, failing to provide accountings, using trust assets for unauthorized purposes, and attempting to transfer Hawthorne despite the trust's terms. They were removed as trustees. A neutral successor trustee was appointed to complete the accounting, recover improper expenditures, resolve Mallory's occupancy, and distribute the deed to me as required. The proposed deed to Mallory Homes LLC and the management lien were declared unauthorized. Elaine and Martin were ordered to return trust records and cooperate with a forensic accounting. The exact financial surcharge would be determined after the accounting, not guessed from the hearing. The judge also directed the clerk to transmit the forged election and related records to the county prosecutor and state financial regulators for independent review. No one was arrested in the courtroom. No criminal sentence appeared beside the civil order. The consequences had begun, but they would follow their own process. The Bennett Family Foundation Board suspended Elaine and Martin that afternoon, pending an independent investigation. Martin told reporters that he had relied on professional advice. Elaine said nothing. Outside the courthouse, Martin accused her of turning a manageable financial arrangement into a family war. She stared at him, as if betrayal had only become real when it reached her. I did not stay to watch them destroy each other. Daniel handed me a certified copy of the order. The deed will not transfer today, he said. The successor trustee must complete the property inventory and address Mallory's occupancy. But your parents no longer control Hawthorne. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt the weight of every fact the judge had confirmed. My parents had done it. There was no final explanation waiting to make them different people. My phone rang. Nora had picked Ruby up from school. "Mom," Ruby said, "does this mean the house is ours now?" I looked at the courthouse steps, the order in my hand, and the blue door waiting several weeks away. It means no one gets to decide for us in secret anymore. It took 6 more weeks before the successor trustee called to say Hawthorne was ready for formal delivery. The forensic accountant had not finished tracing every dollar, and the state investigations into my father's records were still open. But the court had approved the property inventory. Mallory had signed an agreement to vacate, and the deed had been prepared in my name. No one handed me a mansion and a fortune the morning after the hearing. Justice arrived through certified mail, scheduled inspections, bank reviews, and signatures verified by people who had no reason to protect my family. That made it slower. It also made it real. Mallory left Hawthorne voluntarily under an occupancy agreement negotiated by her attorney. She received 30 days to remove her belongings and agreed not to damage or alter the property. I did not force her into the street. I knew too well what it meant to stand beside bags, with nowhere certain to take them. That did not mean she kept the house. It meant I refused to become cruel, simply because cruelty had finally become available to me. On the morning of the handover, Ruby wore her red coat and carried both keys in her pocket. The metal key belonged to our transitional apartment. The cardboard one had been repaired so many times that layers of clear tape covered almost every edge. Evelyn waited beside her car when we arrived at Hawthorne, but she did not walk toward the porch until I nodded. Daniel stood with the successor trustee near the blue door. He carried a final inventory, a copy of the deed, and a small envelope containing the new keys. The maple tree had lost most of its leaves. Bare branches stretched above the roof, and the garden looked smaller without tents, banners, and people pretending not to hear the truth. Ruby stopped at the gate. "Do we have to go in?" "No." She looked up at me. "I thought you wanted the house." "I wanted us to have the choice." She considered the porch. "Can we look first?" "Yes." Daniel handed me the deed and explained that the transfer had been recorded the previous afternoon. The Claire Bennett Residence Trust no longer held title to Hawthorne. I did. The trust remained open only long enough to complete the accounting and recover misused funds. The house itself had finally been distributed as Evelyn intended. Daniel offered me the envelope of keys. I did not open it. I handed it to Ruby. Her eyes widened. "Is this mine?" "It is ours. But you can open the door." She pulled out the cardboard key first. The blue paper circle at the top had faded, and one of the teeth leaned sideways where she had added a strip of cereal box. Ruby walked up the porch steps and pushed the cardboard against the lock. It bent slightly. "It still does not work. It was never supposed to." She looked disappointed. I knelt beside her. That key did something more important. What? It reminded me what I was fighting for before we had a real one. Ruby opened the envelope. Inside were 3 new brass keys. She chose one, inserted it into the lock, and turned. The blue door opened. The house smelled of fresh paint, floor polish, and emptiness. Mallory had removed most of her furniture. Pale rectangles marked the walls where photographs had hung. The foundation banners were gone, along with the podium and gold signs. A few items remained for the inventory team to collect. The white bed frame had been removed from the nursery. The cloud shelves were still attached to the wall. Ruby stood in the doorway. Is this the room? Yes. The one for Aunt Mallory's baby? Yes. She walked inside, but did not touch anything. I do not want this one. You do not have to take it. We explored the rest of the second floor. At the end of the hall was a smaller room overlooking the maple tree. Morning light came through 2 narrow windows. The walls were plain, and a built-in bookshelf ran beneath one window. Ruby went directly to it. This one. You have not seen the 3rd floor. I like the tree. She pressed her face near the glass. When it has leaves, it will look like a green roof. Then this can be your room. Ruby turned around. Can anyone make us leave again? The question did not surprise me. It had been waiting behind every folded blanket, every packed bag, and every adult promise. I sat on the bare floor and held out my hand. Ruby sat beside me. No one can take this house from us with a secret paper or a lie, I said. The deed is in my name now. If life ever changes, I will tell you the truth. We will make decisions together, and I will never make you earn the right to stay by agreeing with me. What if I am bad? You will make mistakes. What if I am really bad? You may have consequences. You may lose television, dessert, or a trip to the park. She waited. But not your home, I said. You never lose your place with me. Ruby leaned against my shoulder. That is what I wanted to know. We did not move in that day. I hired an inspector to check the heating system, electrical wiring, and roof. I reviewed the property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs before deciding what we could afford. Owning a house did not mean living without expenses. Hawthorne was valuable, but value did not pay a heating bill unless I sold it, borrowed against it, or used restored trust funds responsibly. I refused to build our next life on the assumption that money would solve everything. The transitional apartment remained ours for another month while repairs were completed. Ruby continued attending the same school. I kept the contract job reviewing leases and accepted a permanent position with a regional housing organization in January. The work involved reviewing property files, identifying compliance failures, and helping tenants understand documents before signing them. For the first time, my habit of reading every line did not feel like fear. It felt useful. The forensic accounting continued. Some of the money taken from Hawthorne had paid legitimate taxes, repairs, and insurance. Other amounts had funded foundation events, Mallory's renovations, inflated management fees, and services that did not benefit the trust. The court later entered a financial surcharge against Elaine and Martin based on the documented losses. A portion of their investment accounts was placed under a preservation order while repayment was arranged. They were not stripped of every dollar overnight. They were required to return what the records proved they had misused. Martin resigned from Bennett Advisory Group after the state financial regulator opened a licensing investigation. Months later, his professional registration was suspended pending the outcome. He told relatives the process was political. He never explained the email, asking Patrick to match my signature. Elaine and Martin were permanently removed from the foundation board. The remaining directors hired independent counsel and an outside accounting firm. The Home Begins Here program was placed under a board that included housing professionals and former shelter residents. Evelyn refused the chairmanship when it was offered. She said the foundation did not need another Whitmore or Bennett deciding that family authority was the same as accountability. That was the first public decision she made that did not place herself at the center. She visited Hawthorne 2 weeks after the repairs began. Before coming, she texted a question. May I stop by Saturday at 11? I will not bring furniture. I replied with one word. Yes. She arrived at 11 exactly. In her hands was a single envelope. Ruby was upstairs choosing paint samples. Evelyn waited in the entryway until I invited her farther inside. I brought something that belongs to you, she said. It was the original silver cradle card she had sent after Ruby's birth. The delivery receipt bearing Elaine's signature remained attached. I thought the lawyers needed it. They made certified copies. Miriam released the original to me after the record was closed. I held the card carefully. Evelyn looked toward the stairs. I owe you an apology that does not include an explanation. I waited. I believed Elaine because she was my daughter. I let a letter speak louder than everything I knew about you. I had the money and ability to search, but I chose not to risk being rejected. That was cowardice, not respect. Her voice shook. I cannot return the years I missed. I cannot make this house compensate for them. And I do not expect you or Ruby to treat me as if I have always been here. I looked at the woman who had once tried to solve our first conversation with a hotel suite and 3 garment bags. What do you expect? Nothing I have not earned. Ruby came downstairs holding 3 paint cards. She stopped when she saw Evelyn. Are you staying for lunch? Evelyn looked at me before answering. If your mother says I may. You may, I said. That became our beginning. Not forgiveness. Not restoration. 1 lunch. Then a phone call the following week. Later, Sunday dinner twice a month. Evelyn never entered Hawthorne without asking. She did not buy Ruby a bedroom set or offer to redesign the house. When Ruby finally called her great-grandma Evelyn instead of Evelyn, the moment happened over burnt pancakes, and no one announced it. Mallory wrote to me 3 months after the hearing. Her letter was 8 pages long. She apologized for accepting Hawthorne without demanding proof, for seeing my name on the insurance notice, and for continuing to prepare the nursery after learning I had housing problems. She also wrote that our parents had manipulated her, and that she had lost her job, home, and place in the family. I believed both things could be true. Mallory had been manipulated. She had also benefited from not looking too closely. I wrote back 1 page. I told her cooperating with the accounting was necessary, not heroic. I told her I was not ready to rebuild our relationship. If that changed, it would begin with honesty. That did not require me to comfort her for the consequences of her choices. She did not answer. For the first time, silence between us was not being interpreted by someone else. Elaine wrote more often. Her first letter said children should never be separated from grandparents because of adult conflicts. I returned it through Daniel with 1 sentence. Ruby became part of this conflict when you knew she was in a shelter and chose not to help. Her next letter called the court order excessive. The third said she had been acting out of fear that I would waste Hawthorne. None contained the words I was responsible. I did not allow contact with Ruby. Daniel explained that Ohio law did not give Elaine an automatic right to visitation merely because she was a grandmother, especially while I remained Ruby's sole legal parent and contact was not in Ruby's best interests. Elaine could petition the court. She did not. A courtroom would have required her to discuss the shelter log again. I did not promise the boundary would last forever. I promised it would last until Elaine could name what she had done without blaming my finances, my pride, Evelyn, Martin, or the court. By June, that day had not come, and Hawthorne felt less like a file. Ruby's room was painted pale blue, the color she chose after rejecting 12 shades that looked too much like toothpaste. Her books filled the shelf beneath the window. The stuffed rabbit sat on the bed. She no longer kept her school backpack packed at night. I turned the former nursery into an office. I removed the cloud shelves but kept 1 small mark on the wall, where they had been. I did not need the house to forget what happened inside it. I needed it to stop belonging to that meaning. Nora came to dinner after we settled in. So did 2 mothers from the shelter's transitional program and their children. It was not a gala. There were no reporters, donors, or banners. We ate pasta at the kitchen table while the children built a crooked blanket fort in the living room. One of the mothers apologized when her son spilled juice. Ruby handed him a towel. My mom says spills do not make people lose their house. The room became quiet. Then Nora smiled. That is a good rule. I joined the shelter's volunteer document clinic twice a month. I helped residents read leases, identify unreasonable fees, and organize housing applications. I also made a modest donation after the first portion of recovered trust money was distributed. I did not put my name on a room. No child needed to look at a donor plaque while wondering whether she was allowed to stay. On the anniversary of the day Evelyn found us, Ruby brought the cardboard key downstairs. The paper had softened at the corners. The tape had yellowed slightly. Can we put it somewhere safe? We placed it in a simple wooden frame beside our old shelter identification card and the first key from the transitional apartment. I hung the frame in the hallway near the blue door. Evelyn asked whether seeing it every day made me sad. Sometimes. Then why keep it there? Because Hawthorne was not the first place Ruby and I were a family. The shelter had not been our failure. It had been the place where strangers protected our privacy, while relatives monitored our silence. The transitional apartment had not been less of a home because it was small or temporary. It had been the first door no one in my family could open without permission. That evening, I checked on Ruby before bed. Her shoes were beside the closet, one upright and one tipped sideways. At the shelter, she had lined them beneath the bunk every night so she could leave quickly. Now she slept with one foot outside the blanket, the stuffed rabbit beneath her arm, and no packed bag near the door. I stood there longer than necessary. Hawthorne had not healed every wound. A deed could not return 9 years with Evelyn. An accounting could not give me back college. A court order could not make Elaine understand love without control, or make Martin see people instead of liabilities. But the house had become something they never intended. Not a reward. Not a weapon. Not proof that one daughter was more worthy than another. It was the place where Ruby learned she did not have to be quiet, grateful, or perfect to remain loved. Before turning off the hallway light, I touched the frame holding her paper key. Hawthorne was the house they hid from me, but the life inside it was the first thing I built without asking any of them for permission.